respectful of people's time, I'm going to go ahead and call this retreat to order. Yay, it's so good to see you all this morning. So, the first thing on our retreat is the strategic plan update.
All right. And I get to talk?
Yes.
Good morning, Maka.
Hi.
Good morning.
Hi. Get your food if you want to. We all did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I need to get myself together here. I shouldn't have been eating. So I printed out a copy in front of you guys, and then there's also one projected and attached to the board agenda, so you can kind of look at it wherever you'd like to, either electronically or if you like to scribble some notes on the hard copy too. I can collect those afterwards because I'm going to kind of ask you for some feedback here. If you remember when we met in the spring and kind of talked about my evaluation, strategic plan was part of that conversation, and working towards a new strategic plan and kind of redefining some of our goals. And so the way we've framed the sample we have here in front of you starts with, it's called 5-year strategic plan system indicators. We could also call that 5-year goals, 5-year strategic plan goals. Some of this language I did mirror after some other districts that I've seen and maybe we liked, but I would also say we're not necessarily tied to any of those parts of it. So if you have strong feedback on any of that, kind of as I get done walking you through it here, that's what I'm hoping to get from you today, and I think what we need to talk about together. Then so those 3 big goals that we would really look at in those areas are the equity, proficiency, and growth, and those are consistent with what I showed to you last spring. The challenge our team is having about writing those goals, I'm going to kind of lay out for you here about, and again, try to get your feedback, but you can tell right now we're kind of looking at a 5-year time frame, which seems to fit more of the idea of a strategic plan. The team has kind of pushed back on me at different times and said, well, we should have an annual goal because that's easier to measure, and some of the data dives we do, but they also recognize that when you write a strategic plan, it's not really just a 1-year goal, right? This is something we're committing to for the future, and so 5 years seems to make more sense from that standpoint, that we're putting some things in place and we'd like to see this movement over a course of time. So the first one in equity talks about gaps being reduced in reading, math, and across all demographic groups, and so really our subgroups, right, by EL, IEP, and race. We know that when we look at our data that we're discrepant in those areas, and the only way to not continue to be discrepant in those areas is to close the gap between what we see currently. Proficiency, that one I think people are the most familiar with because we've talked a lot about it since the era of No Child Left Behind. I think a part that I would like to hear from you guys a little bit about is something we've spent a lot of time talking about, is do we set what may be a more achievable goal around the idea of proficiency, or do we set it at 100%, knowing that our mission is really for all kids, right? And so when we set goals less than 100%, sometimes that gets tricky from the aspect that then we're not saying that we're really trying, we're not saying publicly or in this document that the goal is 100%. I think we all know the goal is 100%, but when you state it, that might be difficult to have a conversation around. And then the last one, growth, talks about students making 1 year more, or more of growth. I think at a minimum, we want all of our students making their expected growth every year. When you connect this to the first bucket on the equity, we know that some of our students have to make more than one year of expected growth to be able to try to get them where we would like to see them achieve. So kind of not thinking about the bottom part of the document right now and just kind of focusing on the equity, proficiency, and growth. I talked to you about some of the things that we have looked at or that we've considered as we went through there, and you notice that you don't see numbers yet because some of this terminology, I think based on our conversation today and based on the continual conversation that the academic team has, could shift. What we'd really like to do with this document, or in particular the goal statements, is when we present to you the APR on November 15th, is talk about here's what our data shows, now here's our goals moving forward. And I think that's a good time for us to have that conversation and to have these goals solidified and set. We've also recently received the Iowa School Performance Profile data that is a little bit friendlier actually to use than some of the data we've been trying to pull from. So I think that'll help us write these goals in that way too. So I said a lot, but kind of initial reactions to that or thoughts, whether it's just the way it's framed, general terminology, or specifics into those goal areas, and if we're on the right track.
Well, I have two thoughts or two responses. First, with the question between the 1 year and the 5-year plan, I like the 5-year plan because it allows us to have a really big vision, and it gives us room to dream bigger. And I get that means it's hard to measure it, but I like the idea of this is a big strategic plan. And then I don't think there's anything wrong with building in sub-year goals to that, but I like 5 years. And then with proficiency, I think there's a middle line. I mean, our goal is that we have 100% proficiency, but I don't think that's the goal for the 5-year plan. I don't think that's realistic to say that within 5 years, 100% of our kids are going to be proficient. And so maybe there's a way to build that in, that our overall goal is to reach 100% proficiency. In the next 5 years, we hope to close the gap and achieve X percent, and then build on that 5 years out, continue to make improvements, something like that. But I don't like the idea of setting up goals that we know we can't achieve. I don't think that's fair to you or the team to set you up to fail.
Well, the hard part is then they don't become usable, right? I mean, I think that's the other thing is like if it's a usable, achievable, realistic goal, I mean, it's a different conversation than we have with our team, right? You have a mark you're going after. Like this mark of 100% has been something we've been going after for nearly 20 years, but at the same time, I think it's discouraging on some level, right? That it's like, okay, well, we know that's what we're in it for. We're not in it to say no to any kid or to not help them achieve, but what's the next thing we can do, right? What's the next benchmark we can hit to on that way to 100%?
Just a small thing, I like goals better than system indicators. Just I think system indicators to be judging.
I agree.
And I agree, the 100%. I mean, after years of writing IEP goals, you don't write them to 100%. I mean, even though you'd like them to behave appropriately 100% of the time, but you don't write it that way. So yeah.
You want them to read at grade level, but if they're 6 grade levels behind, then that goal becomes meaningless.
Right.
I agree with Lisa's thoughts on the 5-year goals. I think, especially when you're thinking big, you might actually take a step back before you move forward. And so that's why I think that the 5-year rather than the 1 year is really good.
Yeah, I'm on board with the 5-year thing too. And then, I guess as far as setting that number, I guess you would look where, what's our what are we doing in the last 5 years? Like how much did we move? And then project forward. And what I hope, my perception is, right, you say we've been doing this for 20 years, and my perception is those numbers just haven't changed very much at all for anyone in 20 years. And so that would tell me nothing in education is working to solve these problems. Like literally nothing anyone has tried has moved the needle at all. So that's where I don't just want to get into that again, set another goal that won't be met because nothing's ever been met, and we're just making ourselves happy by having these goals that, again, won't be met. So then, and that's why however, these measures are how we're going to be measured, and it's what we need to look at. So that's where, I guess the stuff I get probably more excited about is what's underneath with our focus areas, and thinking, and then I would, so stepping up, I say, if we're going in this HRS model, and our vision then is a guaranteed and viable curriculum for everyone, then whatever we're doing underneath to make it guaranteed and viable, we should see the move in these scores. That would be the goal. And that's what helps me be like, here this morning, and we're going to set these goals, and we're going to see movement because we're going to do something that hasn't really been done. Is sync up our system, have common assessment, so we know in freshman social studies we're measuring the same thing.
Right.
And since we've never done that before, then that's like, okay, Because then I would anticipate that will be longer than 5 years before we get all of our subject areas. That will probably be more like a 10 or 20-year goal to really bring a system in sync where it's humming along. So then my question would be, how then do we measure that? Right? If we're going to have guaranteed and viable, well, we know it won't be guaranteed and viable next year, and probably not in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I guess that's what I'd like to see then along the way. Those are maybe our 1 year goals, like how far have we come to that point? And then that could look like, how many buildings and subject area, because again, probably even thinking more for the principals, right, in their building, how are you getting continuity amongst your folks? Because I think that's where, rather than comparing building to building, I think that's hard because different things are happening in those buildings. But within the building, and then kind of measuring that as we go. Hey, we've made, now we've got science and English on board, and they're seeming to come along. And then we think social studies will be here in a year. So that's, and I would imagine that's underneath, so not to get too far in, I guess.
But I love how you're talking about it, JP. And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Yeah,
off.
no,
You're
it's
still
fine.
finished your thought. But because basically what we have to do first is we have to commit to processes, right? And so we have to commit to processes. We have to hold people accountable to processes. And that's kind of what's in those measurement tools like you're talking about, alluding to later in the document. So those are really probably our more fluid measurement tools and the things that we actually spend our time working on. These are like the big measures to say, okay, are all of those processes we're committing to then moving the needle? We know as we lead change, we could actually see some dips first, right? As you lead change processes, there's resistance you work through from staff. Things don't always bump right away, and you don't always get positive results. But that has to be the goal. These big visionary goals, the big 5-year strategic plan goals, but are things we're going to want to pay attention to from a measurement standpoint in between are going to be those tools at the bottom.
So I guess that's all to say. I really think those three, and I like the three, but they need to be where they are. And we've got to, and that we can't choose to be measured on proficiency. Like, we're going to be measured on
Right.
proficiency. So
Yeah. And I like the fact that it is a 5-year strategic plan, but getting to JP's point, making sure that we are doing the work to see where we are in each year of that and not just sort of waiting until the end and say, oh yeah, this is what we did. Because I think
Right.
that also lends to the sort of encouragement that our team and our administrators and our teachers will need to see that all of these strategies and measurement tools, granted, we might see a dip, but they need to see that we're working toward that goal with the eventual goal of 100%.
Exactly. I think that's the thing. I mean, you can't set the goal and then measure it once in 5 years,
Yeah.
right? There's got to be some other data to inform us along the way, whether it is those process points we were talking about. I think still looking at our data, even though it's a 5-year goal, of course, we're going to track it each year, in those 3 categories to see what is happening. Because there may need to be some kind of a midstream adjustment too. I mean, just because you set a 5-year plan doesn't mean situations don't change or that you don't have a responsibility to respond when you see conditions vary. So I think that's good. Thank you.
So I still am not sure what numbers we're focusing on right now. Like, are we talking about all 3 right now? We're talking about what kind of numbers to plug in?
Yeah, and we'll look at the actual numbers to present to you guys when we do that in November. So I think
Including the goal number? Like, meaning, I understand you guys will plug in the 2022 numbers, okay?
yeah.
But the 2027 numbers, what do you base that on?
Well, what we'll base that on, I mean, that's what we'll have to look at is what is expected growth, how many of our kids are making. So take the growth example. So it says students will make.
I kind of want to do that. I kind of want to go through each one so you can just give us a
Sure.
narrative about it.
So by June 2027, at least, this percentage of students will make 1 year or more of growth. So if right now we have 50% of our students making 1 year or more of growth, we may say a reasonable, achievable goal in 5 years is that then 75% of our students are making 1 year or more of growth.
And what do you do?
Well, I don't think you want to I mean, I think that's probably what we would want to talk about in November, is that when we determine this measure, here's how we did that.
That's what I'm wondering. If
Right.
you'll tell us that at some point.
Yeah.
I don't need to know everything about it. I'm really just wondering, like,
Yeah.
generally, there's like a way that you all, with your expertise, kind of create a way to set that number.
Right. And that's
I
part
would
of the
have no
reason you
idea.
don't have a number today, because
Yeah.
we've had about 3 or 4 conversations in the last 2 weeks, and it is, I don't know, I hate to say it's complex, like we couldn't talk about it, but I
No,
mean,
but
we'd
it
be
is.
here 45 minutes, right, to talk about
Yeah.
how we maybe decide which to do. So I'd rather say, this is what we landed on and here's why,
Uh-huh.
type of conversation. So then proficiency, right, we would look at where the percentage of our students that are proficient now, and then we would set that goal. That's kind of like the all kids one, right? I mean, like our proficiency numbers we know are different by subgroup. Of course, all of these we're going to continue to measure by subgroup and look. You can imagine the way our subgroups look now, and that we'll have, again, a bigger gap in some of those, which speaks to the first goal. But overall proficiency, we'd say, okay, well, if 68% of the students in Iowa City are proficient now, again, maybe we'd want to get that number to 80. That's the achievable aspect, rather than saying we're going to go from 68% to 100%. And then equity, this has honestly been the hardest one for us to get a handle on, because of trying to measure the gaps in so many different areas, right? We're talking about reading, math, science. We have data also from the FAST, but I told the team we're trying to stay focused on Iowa school, or the Iowa assessments here, just from the standpoint I don't really like the idea of the varying measures in our overall strategic plan. Those are, I think, measurement tools for us to, again, speak to those goals. But when we break it down by race, I mean, we have a lot of diversity in the district, of course. That's not a surprise to everybody. We have ELL, we have IEP, we have socially disadvantaged students. So it's hard to make that one clean right now, is what we're talking about. And the examples I've seen, they boiled it down to a number. And I don't agree with the math on how they did that on some of the
Yeah, I was
strategic
just
plans.
asking, like, what's
It's like
the-
averages of averages, which you don't do. And so,
Yeah,
that was, again, another hurdle for us as we've looked at this, is like, how do we not jumble this whole thing to have it be super long and nothing anybody can digest, but still set a relatively, well, not a relatively, but a meaningful goal that people can relatively then digest and know what we're talking about. So that's some of the work behind the scenes on that one, because those gaps are different all over the place. And then they're there, but how do we set a number where we'd say we want to close that gap by said percentage when we know they're very different?
Well, so just kind of think about it, because my first thought was, yeah, come up with a number, and then I was thinking, is there like a super smart statistician person who could do that? And then what you told me is some people have tried and failed, because in my head, that's a complicated formula. And then it's really easy to get sloppy with those, and they lose meaning. But what if it was as simple as, you could say across all demographic groups, you could also say across each demographic group, and then you could have a sort of, we're targeting, so instead of, and maybe this one just looks a little different, so instead of having one number in 2022 and one number in 2027, you want to increase it by, so if we're going from 60% to 80%, each one goes up by a similar ratio.
Right. And I think that's the way we would have to state it, JP, is basically that no matter where the group is at, what's the rate of change we'd want to see out of that group. The way we write our CSIP goals now, to kind of go back to the growth goal, we ask for a 3% increase, but then for our demographic subgroups that are discrepant, we ask for 6%, right? Because it's almost, they have to grow twice as fast.
Yep.
And 3%, again, we've asked the state about how they landed on a 3% for even some of their state reporting measures, and people have looked into just what the research is there for what reasonable growth would be. So that's where this gets really lost in the mud in a hurry. I mean, the last conversation we had the other day was, it's good conversation, but it gets incredibly frustrating in a hurry looking at, okay, where are we really going to set this? But I like the idea of wherever their starting point is, what is the rate we would like to see change to close that gap?
And then the message would be, and the reasonable message is, if we're going to achieve the equity goal, it probably does have to be twice as much, or whatever that number is, but it's a lot more. And that then justifies the emphasis we're placing on equity, because the need is so much greater, not just according to our feelings, but according to our strategic plan, based on all of that stuff. Then it's that's why we're putting our eggs in that basket, because we've got more work to do there. We're making up more ground in those populations than as a whole. And then I think that's why we justify the money we spend on equity and the time we put there, because we've got twice as much work, or 4 times as much, whatever it is. But it is more. And we do need each of those to grow. We need them to grow if we're gonna meet, because that, and then, you know, if we meet that, well, of course that's gonna raise these up. If we're meeting our equity goals, boy, in fact, that's gonna raise these up by, you know, bringing someone up from 25% to 75 or 50% is gonna have a bigger impact on your overall number than moving someone from 70 to 80.
Yep.
And so.
When
this
you
is
kind of
how
talked
it's
about the
gonna-
difficult balance that every once in a while I'll end up in a conversation with the community member around, right, about why we talk about equity so much. Well, part of the reason we talk about equity so much is because the kids that aren't achieving in our system, you know, we know that's where our work has to be. And so, again, to your point about justifying some of the strategies that are in place, I mean, I think it clearly paints the why we need to do that work, right?
Yeah.
I just want to say I agree with the support of the 5-year time frame. I think a 10-year time frame is not a time frame. It's simply some things out there. And I think that's literally true. I guess I'm going to try to focus less upon the numbers you come to and more on the process you use to get to those numbers. We do have to be at increases here to this community on what we're doing to change our equity ratios, as well as our overall efficiency ratios, which will follow that. I'm kind of attached to the notion of trying to couple communicating the numerics for equity, proficiency, and growth with a strategy for attaining whatever the numerics are, and communicating that to the public. So, to me, that would make more sense than down the line.
What are we actually doing?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing you say, right, Charlie? Is okay, here's the goals, but here's what we're actually doing, right? Making sure we're communicating that.
Here's
Yeah.
what we're doing, and we're convinced that doing this will support those goals.
And that leads to the conversation of what those strategies.
Yeah, should we keep moving? Yes, yeah. I noticed it's 9:25 and we're, and some of the next topic is, you know, strategies for you guys, right? But if we kind of shift to the second half of the document then, you're going to see that we outline this in our focus areas to support that work. And the reason I like the layout of this, even when I presented it to you guys in the spring, is I think it couples our, and the way we're kind of organized right now in our organizational chart is teach and learning and operations somewhat, right? And we have a deputy superintendent over each of those. There seems to be 2 categories underneath here that are primarily teach and learning focused, and then 2 that are also primarily operations focused. But of course there's overlap. There's all kinds of overlap in the work. But the first category of culture and equity, I think you could also think about like learning environment, and maybe you guys will tell me you like that better from that standpoint, but that's kind of what I think about when I think about why that category exists, is providing the right learning environment for our students. The second one of student learning really talks about just what we think about in the classroom, achievement. Are we learning? Are we teaching in a highly effective way? Do we have the curriculum in place? The third one is around workforce, knowing how that important is to us from not just a shortage aspect, but for us to continue to recruit and retain diverse employee groups that look a lot like our kids, and that we are training our folks to be able to be successful with our students. And then the last one, systems and resources, kind of the support mechanisms we put in place to make sure we provide a great experience here in the Iowa City Community School District. So there's a purpose statement attached to each of those about why that one is offset or why that's a category. I'd like to hear kind of what you guys think about if those purpose statements make sense, if they have a place to be in the document. And then the strategies, of course, hopefully most of the things on that list, not if everything on that list makes sense. And I think this is a point of pride, honestly, a little bit for our team, and should be for you guys. Like when we think about all of the things we're trying to do to support our students, there's a heck of a lot of work going on. And that's what gets me excited about HRS, just because if you remember one of the first visuals I showed you on that was all that energy that was being kind of fractured off or diverted. And there wasn't really a plan or a way to pull all of that together and make sure that the strategies, while we kind of inherently know they're interconnected, how do they systemically connect to make sure that we're leading for higher achievement for our kids and those positive outcomes. So strategies there, and then I'm going to come back to strategies here in a second, but then finally the measurement tools, and this is a little bit of what JP was getting at around, okay, what are the things that we would want to measure along the way, or some other data that we are going to want to have to help inform our decisions about if we're making the progress to have a chance of achieving those top 3 goals. So that's the overall layout. I do think as we've looked at this, there's probably another way to offset some things that are bigger ticket items for us, if you will. I think we'd probably say it differently than that, but when you think about HRS implementation or our comprehensive diversity, equity, inclusion plan or our comprehensive school improvement plans, those seem to be like they set a vision, they set a direction for the district, for the work. And so I don't know if it's a different color or if it's a way to run them across totally, but they are really big strategies, right? And I guess Portrait of Educator, Portrait of a Graduate, I would also see in that same lens. Those are the ones that set the direction for us, FNP 2.0, that same way. So we've tried to list them first in each of those categories, but we also might want to note those with a different color, offset them in a different way. And then some of the other more specific strategies that you see underneath there all support the work in those areas. So I think on this element, and it's not like it all has to happen here today too. I mean, as we continue to talk, any input you guys continue to have around this is helpful, but, are there things we're missing? Do you like the purpose strategies, measurement tools? When I showed this to you in the spring, it was blank. Well, now we actually have some data in here, right? This is kind of some of the work we've been doing since then, and then getting these things up and moving, of course, in the system too. But what's our overall reaction to kind of just what I walked through there?
I just want to ask.
Go ahead. What is the shelter construction observation protocol? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so that's for our English language learner students. And so not only EL teachers, but gen ed teachers get trained in SIOP. And that helps them really be able to teach the language while they're also delivering their lesson. And so we've spent a lot of time and energy training teachers up through that. So whether you're a math teacher, or whether you actually co-teach with a specific EL teacher, any of our staff would have that training available to them. It's very intense and long, so that's why it's a slow roll on how many staff we can get really trained into that.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead.
To actually ask JP a question. I've heard you comment that teachers tend to see some of these elements in the strategy list as things that they have to do on top of all the other things they're supposed to be doing. Is that true? And I can say it's true. Should we consider looking at these strategies from that standpoint, as one standpoint, and then figure out if there are some of them we should actually stop doing?
I won't speak to everyone, and if I said it was true, I appreciate that deference, but I just think that hopefully that's sort of a guiding lens for all of the work, is that, so if we use SIOP, for example, which is really, the sheltered instruction for ELL. So it's a really intense thing. Again, the biggest thing I think for teachers, and Matt said this previously, when people see the progress and they see that it's effective, I think that's the most important thing, or not the most, that's a really important thing, that people can see it's going to have an impact and believe that it's going to have an impact. And the other thing, then the biggest thing is, here's the thing to do, and here's when you're going to do it. We have given you the time. So what I'm talking about is when we just stack these things on top, and we provide we don't build in any time on purpose. That's like, these 4 hours are for this thing, because usually what happens is we just add things. And then we don't build in the time, and so we're just like, from our thing, we're like, Matt, you figure it out. And then Matt says, principals, you figure it out. And the principal, like, teachers, you figure it out. All the way down, and figure out what? I have all this free time. I've got these hours where I don't have anything going on. So that, to me, I think that more than, and the board isn't, we won't be able to, that's Matt's job, to drill down at that level. And
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything on this list is something we think we should stop doing. We wouldn't want to put it on here. I do think there's probably some other things that, we do in the district that I'm not sure are as high leverage and that we commit some time and energy to. And I think that's our continual work to make sure we stay focused on the strategies we say are important. And it also protects us in a way. When somebody comes in and says, hey, we want you to do this, well, is it a strategy that supports our strategic plan work? And if it's not, then really should we be committing to it? Because that's the other fault I think we have in public ed sometimes. Somebody finds a shiny new object and they want us to employ it. Well, is it really going to have high impact, or is it going to divert our focus against from what we're trying to do? So here's one example of something like JP was talking through and why HRS I think makes sense to our folks is important. So culturally responsive teaching PD. We spent a long time, or we continue to spend time on culturally responsive teaching PD. That's great. It's a good strategy, necessary. All of our staff need to do it. But we can get the question about why. Why is that important? Well, in student learning, you're going to see new art and science of teaching instructional framework. That's best practice instruction. Guess what? Culture responsive teaching is best part of is a high leverage instructional practice that will be directly connected to level 2 implementation of HRS, and this is the instructional framework we're asking you to look at. So when you're learning this strategy, here's how it connects to the instrument that your principals are talking to you about best practice instruction, and as part of our level 2 from our overall pathway we've showed you around HRS. So it becomes, if anything, it helps articulate the vision about why we're spending time. And I think that just overall, anytime then we want to lead change or ask people to be committed to something, when they see where it all connects and how it serves the higher purpose of achieving these goals, we get better return on our investment rather than doing these isolated events that we have a hard time articulating.
So I think that was a good example. I don't think we should be looking at all of these in this retreat. I think this is too substantive. You've run us through an example of how the mission works, of how the strategy works. I think as a board, if we have individual questions about specific strategies, we can't do that very thoroughly here, nor do I think we should. I would say we need to, as a board, look at the strategic plan in terms of what message it gives to our district. Does this read well? Molly pointed out right away there was jargon. We want to avoid that. We want to make sure it flows because it's clearly created as a flow chart type thing. So to that, and I would agree that school culture reads better than culture and equity because those focus areas are goal-driven focus areas to support the 5-year strategic plan goals. So for me, this is about making sure this document creates the narrative so that it has an impact as a strategy. So the goal-driven focus areas, well, culture and equity can't be the goal-driven focus area for equity. So instead, as Superintendent Decker said, I think we choose school culture because that should be a goal-driven focus area that will result in equity. So that makes sense. Student learning, workforce systems, and resources, you could put all that into a sentence, it would correspond correctly with 5-year strategic plan goals. So I think that works. I think that I agree with what you said about making sure we highlight with the color, for example, HRS, because you can see if you put it all in the same color that it applies to all 4 strategies. All 4 goal-driven focus areas. All of it is the same. Then if you look at the comprehensive diversity and inclusion one, again, that does go across the whole thing. Perhaps you want to color code that so that, again, visually people are seeing that these strategies are big guys and that they work in all 4 goal-driven focus areas. So I think that makes sense. I think then if you go down, I also think you can remove the word purpose because that's unnecessary. You just put the definition under each one. And then the measurement tools, you can again highlight the consistency. HRS is written across each one so everybody can see that visually that is being used yet for measurement for all 4 of the goal-driven focus areas. To me, that's what we kind of need to make sure we're understanding, is how these tie together, and you just gave an example.
Can you say that last one again before you go too far? You were down on measurement tools?
Measurement tools, if you look at the top one of each one, you see that HRS is listed. It provides a different, I think at different levels, yes it does. But you would highlight that in the color again, and it does.
Oh, you're talking about highlighting.
Yeah, and it does look good when you do it. If you want to see it, you can visually see that that it works well like that.
Mhm.
I think that, again, it should create a narrative in everyone's mind. It's a strategic plan. It should be easy to absorb. All of those different strategies, I don't know all of them. I'm familiar with most of them. I can ask you separately. I can also Google it. I'm going to trust that the admin knows what strategies they want to use. I'm assuming that a year from now, if one of those strategies isn't working, like you said, you take it. And that's where I am.
I hear you, Mark, and I'm really tying that into what Matt said about as long as there's a cohesive plan for the whole thing, and it isn't just, we're doing this, and over here we do this, and we do this, and it's just this, because then it becomes, because I understand all these things, but the public won't, and that's just a long list of things. So we need them to trust that we've all done the work to direct Matt, that all this stuff is feeding really cleanly. So the public knows it, but even more importantly, our staff really understands, hey, this is all driven, and we're not just like the shiny new thing, which is, it's not, it's a stereotype because it is so true that in education we are constantly going after the shiny new thing, and you do it for 2 years and then and so teachers are like, this too shall pass. We will wait it out.
And I think the way that we create that is based on what we do as a board to further and support the strategies that's listed. Like, what will we then set our work around to offer direction to Matt and his team to ensure that we have the same things in mind when we sit at the board table, make decisions, and speak on what's important. We don't need to know like every single detail, but we need to stay consistent with what some of these strategies are for student learning, because that drives our work from the board table.
So if someone comes to our board meeting and says, I really wish, our school's really noticing a lack in executive function, and I'm going to think Avid, and I'm going to think it's on the strategic plan, well, I'd love if we could put that in there. But it's a good checklist. This is a checklist of the tools we have.
Right. And I think as far as taking things off the teacher's plate, I think it's the implementation of some of these that causes teachers to say, oh, I can't do one more thing. I want 27 lesson plans to see that you're doing SIOP or whatever. It's those pieces that we have to look at to take stuff off people's plates, not the strategies itself, but what we're expecting them to do to show they're doing them or whatever it is.
So can we do that at the board level?
I think that's an admin.
That's an admin building level thing.
That's a building
Yeah.
level thing.
Like,
If they
part of
know
like
that's
we're
what we're saying.
Yeah.
And we're giving them the message like, hey, we don't want to just be piling on.
Right. We want these to be
No
supported.
unfunded mandates.
Yeah,
For the
no,
school
and
board.
our fun is time,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Part of it's the pace that we throw
Yeah.
Right.
things at them, right? I think that's the hard thing is when we get into community conversations, we try to identify a solution with the school board from a leadership team perspective, then it gets run down into the organization. We haven't had time to implement the previous thing effectively. And we're already on to a new one, right? And so I think that's where we can help protect our people is that may be good. It's probably good for kids. Most of the things we do are, and you've heard me say that. It's just we got to spend the time on the things that matter most. And if we've identified those now, we can't divert our focus again to another new thing. It's going to have to wait. We might have to do it someday, but we have to make sure we get implemented what we said first.
And that's what you're doing with HRS, is
Right.
it's coming out very slow, and that's exactly how it has to come out. Yes, that
So,
people aren't
Matt,
going out.
If the district board had this document in front of us at 3 years ago, could we be doing HRS today?
So if you'd had this document in front of you, what would HRS have been on it?
No,
3 years ago?
No, because
Yeah.
it wasn't in the districts. I never heard about it 3 years ago. But could it have gotten into?
Yeah, I think if you'd have had this 3 years ago, HRS would still help you do this better. That's what HRS is a tool to do, right? I mean, HRS identifies strategies within there that saying, okay, we might have had these goals, but what high reliability schools is going to help you be able to do is actually have a path about how are you going to do all of this and how's it going to fit together. But I don't like the way you guys looked at me after I said that, so you must not be.
I think Charlie's saying, if we had had it 3 years ago, would it have worked? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, would we be in a different place? If we started HRS earlier, would we be, I guess he's asking for the vote of confidence that we would be.
Oh yeah, well I think so. I mean, but the other thing is, I mean, are we also going to go back and maybe talk about if we had a pandemic or not? I mean, like, I think if we just started HRS at the beginning of a pandemic, right, that would have been loser deal.
I
So
think I'm
yeah.
trying to ask, could we have started using implementing HRS if this schema had been in place?
Sure, we could have. Yeah.
It works for every schema.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, a few just, I agree with Mary Kay that we can take the purpose off, and I
Okay.
think that'll make less clutter, or it's not clutter, but like there's a lot of, and let me start up by saying, this is the favorite one, my favorite one-page sheet that I've ever seen from the district. Like, this is like the Cliff Notes for
Yeah, we
a
do.
school board member.
Yep.
Like, and along those lines, I'm not sure how accessible it will be for the public. But for the 7 of us, like, I'm just going to carry this in my purse at all times. And then when I get not caught, but approached in a conversation on the street about like blah, 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 I'm going to pull it out and be like, well, let me tell you why
Yeah.
we're doing it.
Here's what we're doing about
Well,
that.
it will be accessible because once we sort of agree on
yeah.
it, we're gonna make.
No, we are. We're
sure-
going to push it out. But I think it's
I got
hard
you.
to digest
Yeah.
if you're not doing the
Yeah.
work every single day the way that we do the work. Because it's high level stuff. I love it. But I think taking the purpose out will make it just one less thing on there. I'm on the opposite mind of the color coding because I'm worried it's going to add more visual to it and there's so much on it. But maybe if we take the purpose off, there'll be room to add another visual element. I don't know. That's really in the weeds. I do also agree that maybe we take equity off and we put school culture for the same reason equity wasn't a portrait of a graduate item, because everything we do is driven by equity. And that's, we don't have to say, I'm worried that if we just focus on equity and the culture and equity, it gets lost that student learning, workforce, and systems are all equity driven by the work. You know, we want equity in our workforce, equity in our student learning, equity in our systems and resources. So I think we maybe pull that off of culture, go to school culture, and if somebody says, where's the equity, everything.
I mean,
Has the
we
equity.
have an indicator being equity.
Yes.
That's the
Yes, yeah,
major umbrella.
And it's all over the page,
Yeah.
you know, in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, it's represented.
And then I agree, we have individual conversations if we have questions on the strategy, and it's really,
Yeah.
there's a lot of trust on my part that you've put the strategies that you want to work with. But that being said, in 2 years, if you were to come to us and say, you know what, we're pulling HRS off the strategies, I'm going to want to know what, like, that's when I want to have a real, like, what didn't work? Why are we going away from it? This was something that you identified 2 years ago as a really important strategy for us to use to meet student learning. Why did it fail? So that's where I think the tough conversations would happen.
Yeah.
Is when you want to change this, because
Yep.
I'm going to want to know why.
Yep, and that makes sense, though, they'd want to tell us.
Yep,
Right?
yeah.
Right.
I mean. I
We're
think
not
that-
seeing achievement improved because
Yeah.
of this tool, and we
Right.
found a new
Something
tool that
different.
we think is going to be different because of these systems that it addresses.
Yeah, I love it. It's a checklist, which Matt knows drives everything for me.
It's just going in the purse. Yeah.
It's
Just
great. Yeah, it's
carrying
great.
it- carrying it
It's a
around.
checklist.
It's super handy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a great checklist.
Yeah.
It's a great document. However, I'm wondering, do these seclusion and restraint folks, if they look at this, what are they going to say about whether they're putting together focus areas and strategies to reduce seclusion and restraint? Can they see that?
Yeah, I think so, with the social emotional behavioral health piece, positive behavior interventions, multi-tier systems, I mean, I think it's all over.
So you
the
think they'd be convinced that those
Well, they may not be
strategies-
convinced.
I think
Well,
it will be in the way that we as a board frame it and discuss it, as well as administration. I don't think that we can list sort of every hot topic or every issue of concern. I mean, because then it's sort of like, okay, then what will we hear from Black and brown family, Latino family? I mean, there's things across the
Yeah.
board for different groups of people. But I think it's important that we can tie that into some of those things that, and they fit within those things that Molly mentioned.
Well, I
And we're
think
making progress.
I was gonna say, I'm not sure why that would even be a hot topic right now in our district. We had a meeting about all of that and addressed data, and we're kind of doing a great job on that. So this is obviously the checklist that's working for us, right? We're using these strategies and we got that data.
Kind of again, I think the threat to the organization, like maybe threat's a little dramatic way to say it, but is they don't agree with potentially a group doesn't agree with PBIS and thinks we should be committed to a different strategy. Well, our group is committed to PBS. We've
Yeah.
spent a lot of time, energy, and training in there, so we can't just shift to another model, even though maybe a special group would be advocating for that. And I think that's what this document helps us to do, is that this is our identified strategy of how we're trying to work through that, or the social, emotional, behavior health implementation. Well, what is your plan for that implementation, Matt? That's the question you should ask me. So if people say, what are we doing, right? We've had those conversations. Then we're able to have the conversation around what that looks like. And then do we have identified strategies to do the work or not? And then that's a conversation again about, okay, well, do we think we're on the right strategy? Are we on the right implementation plan for that? But I think that's the constant threat to us, is people come in with the new strategy, and is it something that fills a void for us? Is it a different way of doing what we think we're already committed to?
Well, and I think that's then what's helpful about the indicators, because then in 5 years, we see no change in the disciplinary discrepancies. Then we can just say, this is not working.
Right, and then it gives us an opportunity
I
to
know
shift.
that you're committed to PBIS. It's not working. We have to do something
Or
else.
even 1 to 2 years in,
Yeah.
as you move,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, we're seclusion, we saw these numbers, they're going in the wrong way. And then I think, if there are people with specific concerns, that's where we have folks who work here who they could have a meeting and they can talk about, and then have those really in the weeds conversations about, because there are people who just feel PBIS is not correct.
Oh, yeah.
I was talking to somebody recently, and they're like, oh, this HRS stuff is so 10 years ago. And I'm like, well, okay, and that, again, because that's I think, it's like somebody who came in here and told us, I believe, we had 2 ultimatums. We had both 24 hours to solve all of the racism, and then somebody gave us 30 days.
Yes.
And so that's
Don't worry.
Then
You're
that's
not.
where
You're not.
Because for some people, it becomes an emotional driven, and
Which we
again,
can all understand that.
we can all understand. So I think then we have to explain our why, and if we can do that with confidence, not just because we say so, but because we're looking at our data,
Yeah.
and if it's telling us a different story, we can make an adjustment, and we're willing to do that. So that's why, when Matt said, if something's not working, we can change it. We don't, we're committed to this, and we're going to measure it, and we won't be so rigid as to say, if we can see something's not working, we will find another tool that will do. And then that will be their job, and then we can refer to those people, they can have a meeting and have those high-level conversations. And sometimes, we might agree to disagree. I mean, we have to make a choice, and we have to make decisions, and we have to go with something.
I think the heaviest load is gonna be the top 3 figuring out numbers, and we don't do that.
No, we
And
don't.
that's why
We
it's not here yet.
support,
So you're welcome.
Yeah.
we support those numbers,
We support
but getting to, I forgot because Maka got me laughing in my head.
My bad.
Um, Dang it.
Sorry, was it
Getting to
PBIS?
no, it's getting to, one, I'm trying to do my due diligence and make sure we're moving along on the agenda. And tying it to our strategies to support the strategic plan. And it goes back to the we that JP was using, that when we see maybe the needle not moving in 1 or 2 years, it's important that Matt knows that we as a board won't wait for him to come and say, this isn't working, but we're gonna drive that hard conversation with him and say, this isn't working. Tell us, what can you do differently? What can we as a district do differently to move those needles? So that's one of the things I think as a board we have to commit to, and being that.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, we have to review it every year, right? But during that review process, maybe it's when the board
Yep.
proactively says, are you satisfied with these numbers? We're not sure we are, could you explain it?
And I envision us using this in the evaluative
Well, I was gonna
process.
say, that's where we first
Yeah.
saw
Definitely,
this.
we would.
Yeah.
Wasn't, Matt was, during your evaluation, you're like, here's a tool. So that tells me that's what that tool
Yeah.
is for, that this is
Yeah.
what Matt's saying, this is what you can measure it by.
But we're supposed to do a 6-month and a year, right? So
Yeah.
I think we'll be revisiting this at least twice a year,
Yep.
every year.
Yeah.
And probably pretty soon here.
Okay.
I would just clarify my evaluation is based on the Iowa Administrator Standards.
I know.
So,
Not
not on
No,
success of the
these numbers
strategic
go
plan.
up, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I would clarify when JP said that you come into your evaluation and he says, here's a tool, he wasn't referring to you.
Yeah.
Okay. I think, so one thing as you guys think about this, I mean, just like we talked about processes we want to commit to, right, that's the way I would think about for this. So that we don't, because the worst case scenario in these type of documents is you create a great document and it just sits there and nothing ever happens. And I think that's kind of,
Yeah.
that's what I hear Rutina getting at is,
Yes.
okay, what is going to be our commitment as a group here that we continue to say, how do we come back to this? What are the things we're looking for that either indicate success or concern or just continually moving down the path? I mean, we talked about how you could see some dips in different things. You could also see some quick success in different things, and you don't want to overreact to either of those.
No.
And so I think what are the, that's the part I think would be helpful to our team to know, what does that continual process and look like, so we stay focused on this, because that, and again, protects you guys, right, from all these different issues. It's like, this is our work. This is what we should be focused on, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're all responsible for the outcomes of the kids in our district. And so how do we keep that a continual focus for our conversations?
And that continual focus is with our quarterly reports that we do get that focus in on a lot of these different areas. Because you guys come, next month, I think we're going to be going over our annual report.
Yep.
That focuses on a lot of these pieces. And then we get our seclusion report, I think, in another 3 months. So there will be that constant work that we do that still ties into these strategies.
And that could be a cool messaging thing too, right? Is every time we talk about one of those, we could connect the dots for
Yeah.
people.
Well, I think that helps too. When you get that huge annual report, it just helps us to narrow down, highlight the things that we really, that are telling us what we need to see according to this.
But along those lines, it'll be now even more important to build in past year's data into those reports so we can see the trend
Where the
lines.
trend and the-
Yeah,
for sure.
not necessarily from 10 years ago, but,
No.
moving
Yeah.
forward, if this is year 1, so next year we see easily digestible that we don't have to hunt and look for, how is the trend going?
Yeah, which those annual reports do a good job of graphing stuff out, so obviously you guys are already able to do all that,
Yep.
Great.
And I also think in terms of board strategies, I think a way for us, if we have to have hard budget conversations this year or next year or in the future, I'm going to be asking myself, if we have to cut something or if we're trying to find money for something, how does this support the strategic plan? Does this funding request fit in with our strategic
Yes.
plan? And if it doesn't, as awesome as it may seem, I don't think that's something, if we're in tough budget times, that we can fund.
Nope.
But if it does, then we may have to take a tough look and say, do we have existing programs that aren't You know, it's that arrow picture,
Yeah.
Matt, that's not swimming in the same direction. Do we have to cut that in order to fund this really important initiative?
To further our strategic plan.
Yes.
Yep, that's the type of conversation and the way we need to frame those conversations going forward as a board to show the community that that's our thinking and maybe hopefully drive people into thinking that way as well. I know I have big hopes on that, but I think we can do it.
Well, if you look at, I spent some time looking at a lot of different websites for districts around the country the last couple of days to look at how they present theirs. And I looked at private schools too, and religious schools, because I just wanted to see what was working for people or what wasn't working. And, you know, putting this front and center as a click, or however Kristen wants to do it, is how you
Yeah.
make it prevalent,
Yeah.
right? And it's prevalent on most people's websites, district's website.
Yeah. I think that's an important message.
Another great example when you're talking about cost stuff would be like Avid per se. You brought it up earlier.
I love Avid.
So Avid's a strategy for us, but is it really a district-wide strategy? I hesitated about, no, it's not.
No.
It's actually in school buildings.
Yeah.
We should.
And then I think then the conversation, this is what would be the best case scenario, right? We look at Avid, the success it is or isn't having in certain school buildings, the cost that it would take to implement, the time, and we'd say, is that something we want to commit to as a district, or do we continue to leave that a building-based strategy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think those are the types of things. And then again, HRS gives us the flexibility to do that. There may be things that buildings identify that they want to commit to help achieve their HRS levels, but as a district, we're not saying necessarily we're going to continue to support that.
So that's important. Actually, that's something that's an important asterisk. I'm not sure, Matt, if it needs to be on here
I
somewhere.
don't think it probably should.
But it's an important
But it was one I
asterisk.
put on there to talk about.
Yeah, that some of these are used some places and not others, and we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
Well, PBIS, I mean, is it being used and how? I mean, you know, that's just an example of you have a thing and we're all over the map. But we could say the same thing about social studies. Like, that's why HRS helps it, because it takes all of those things as we're going to at least be comparing apples to apples.
Yeah.
Well, and here's another one, right? And just continue to talk about HRS. So PBS, we've been all over the map. Why? Well, has it been the expectation?
Right.
Well, if positive culture and climate and safe, supportive, collaborative schools, and your data doesn't reflect that you are doing that, or it's not to the level we'd like to see, we've given you a strategy to help achieve that, right?
Okay.
And so that's moving from the good idea to the expectation stage, right? Is that these are the identified tools that we've said as a district we're supporting. So if your data isn't reflecting that you're achieving these at a certain target level, here's what we're going to keep pointing you to, right? Here's the strategy to do it. And so that's the part where I think we also move from good idea to actual expectation for implementation.
And you can also say, you need to look at these other two buildings over here.
Yeah, and then we have models of where it's
Yeah.
working great.
Does it very well.
Exactly.
Well, because they're following
Yep.
the implementation and the fidelity of it to make it then a district-wide expectation. And I don't know if people feel good about those 2 points, and we can dive into legal services, or if there's anything that people have closing thoughts on.
Do PLCs go on here? The PLC idea?
Yeah, and so I didn't pull it off because it's such a critical part of that level 1 implementation, Molly, for HRS. So the 3 big indicators we're continuing to be focused on with the buildings are staff and students and their responses to the safe collaborative culture. 1.1, 1.2, and then 1.4 is teacher teams. And PLCs are the model we'll commit to here as a district. And so it's measured in the implementation. And you notice for strategy, I say implementation of HRS, and then certification is the measurement tool. Did you reach certification? Did you actually achieve what you're supposed to be doing in level 1?
So it's the
Yeah. So I think it's embedded in that, but that could be another good point that maybe we say, maybe we should be pulling that out. So, because there'll be a lot of conversation around it, because it is a strategy for us to accomplish highly effective teacher teams.
And to do the vigorous and reliable, I can't say the right words, curriculum.
Yeah.
I mean, the PLC, that has to be there. But
Yeah, if you don't have that in place, you can't do level 2, you can't do level 3. Yeah.
My perception, based on what you guys just said, is that the teachers and the administrators in the room thought that was important to pull.
Well,
maybe it
because
is.
I think we can see that it's embedded, or maybe we know that, but I think generally speaking,
Other people might not see that.
That's what I'm thinking. And if you 3 are thinking that it's something that everyone needs to understand, I think we pull it out. Yeah, we've all read the book, we all know that it's part of it, but.
Because it is different than traditional, right? I
Mhm.
mean, traditionally, teachers are,
Islands.
yeah, they're on
Yeah,
islands. or
Yeah,
isolated.
and to me, it's one of the best parts about HRS. I mean, I'm really excited about it. It is gonna help get those arrows pointing in the same direction.
Yep.
Good idea. Thank
Yeah,
you.
good pull out, good call out there, guys.
This is,
It's great.
It's the only reason.
no.
Thank you.
He's just clicking. We're moving on to legal. I
Legal.
think he's.
All right, so I somehow got kicked out of board docs there.
Sometimes if you sit too long.
Everything's going good.
Yeah,
Life is great.
my computer's really needy. If you don't
Thank you.
use it, it just shuts down automatically. So try to keep with that. But so legal services.
Yes,
Okay.
legal services.
Yeah. You want me to start that?
Yeah, but
Okay.
so to be clear, we're not talking about the quality of current legal services.
Right, yeah. And so we have a current general counsel. So this conversation is not a review of their services to the district or anything that way. I think the reason, if we were going to do that, we would want to do a closed session with that. And I've told Holland and Associates we were going to have this conversation today, but that it was not a performance review, that we weren't getting into that conversation. I think that what generated this conversation is knowing we have an organizational meeting coming up, and the primary counsel that we worked through out of Holland's office is retired as of this summer. And so for us as a district, I think it would be helpful for our administrative team to know what you would like to see as next steps, as far as if we'd like to explore some additional options, if you'd like to continue the conversation with Holland. What we would suggest is if we were going to explore additional alternatives, and of course Holland's firm could continue to submit through this process, would be to do an RFP for legal services to see what is kind of the current playing field in the community or throughout the state at large. District needs have continued to grow in this area, not always from a fortunate aspect, right? I mean, none of us like to be involved in litigation, but an organization this size, we understand that's a very real possibility and something that happens with our district. So I think that was really the reason for bringing it to attention here, also knowing that board organizational meeting is coming up soon, and if there was going to be some kind of a shift or a conversation, it needed to happen here pretty timely. So just open it up with that to see, kind of what you guys would like to see us do from a next step process there and what to bring you back.
I personally like the idea of taking a look to see what other services are out there, because it doesn't exclude our current legal services. And if we get that information back and they're one of the ones that we're like, oh my gosh, yes, we can have that further conversation with them, maybe in closed session, more performative of what we've had in the past and what we want to see different. But I think to do our due diligence, we need to see what else is out there, knowing that as a district, our legal risks continue to grow or continue to open up, and we just want to make sure we are prepared for anything.
Yeah, that the community or that in general, everyone's become more litigious.
I'm not super, not just.
And I think also, I'd like to see the RFP structured into multiple RFPs, because lawyers are specialized. And I think it's unrealistic of us to expect that our lawyer who is an expert in special ed is an expert in real estate and contracts, is an expert in general litigation. And so I wonder if the admin team, I mean, I think you guys know kind of our hot buttons of legal services, could target, these are the things that we need. And people can submit multiple RFPs. I mean, if somebody thinks that they do, submit it all, that's great. But, there might be somebody out there who's a great special ed lawyer that would serve us well for special ed. I've said this before from the table. I think we have great lawyers here. I'm not super excited about the idea of Des Moines lawyers or out-of-state lawyers simply because they're going to charge for travel, and I think that's a cost that the district doesn't need to incur. And so I'm wondering if in that RFP we can also say, like, travel will not be paid at a normal hourly rate or something. And maybe that's too in the weeds, but I would like to start right away and let people know that at least when I was in private practice, travel was 50% of your hourly rate. Which, I mean,
You can't bill if you're driving, and you have to bill or you don't make money.
yeah, I mean, you have to, and I'm not saying they don't get paid for
Yeah.
travel. You have to
But we're not
recognize it.
paying at the full.
But not at the
rate.
full hourly rate. I don't know, Mary Kate, you might know better now if that's still standard, that travel's at 50%.
100%.
Is it at 100% now?
I don't know anyone
Yeah.
that ever did 50, so good for you. Again, if you're, kudos. We don't need to talk about that,
Yeah.
but I would say different considerations. You know, travel costs, there's not as much need to travel. People, we could hire someone from Des Moines, and they might be more efficient because they might be the best provider. We don't know. But we can say, when possible, we would prefer it to be done electronically.
Yeah.
Right? And most attorneys are doing that now.
Then that's great, yeah.
So we don't actually have the travel costs then come up very often, unless you're going into court. So, but that is an important thing to mention. The other thing I would say is in the RFP, and I think you would agree, there might be a law firm that says, we have 3 attorneys that do all that in our one law firm.
Yeah.
And that's kind of efficient too, when you have that, because then they can talk to each other. So I'm not as reluctant to go outside of the city or the community. I don't know why in the world we'd go out of the state. I mean,
Yeah.
No, yeah.
so anyway, I think an RFP, I reiterate what's been said, I think an RFP is a good idea.
Yeah, and we do it in other things where you just say something to the effect, you prefer somebody local, and you consider it, you don't make it a hard stop, but you say, we'd rather hire somebody from the community. And that, we do that with almost everything that we do. We have some sort of like, well, you know, we're gonna give a little higher bump to somebody who's local.
Here's the thing though, practically speaking, as a general practice attorney that does education law, you're gonna conflict out almost all the time. If you're in the community, it's so hard not to conflict out. You should see me try to get somebody to represent a kid in IEP. Do you know how many calls I get for the district and I say no? And then I don't know who to refer it to. It's really hard. So I don't think there's gonna be a good chance of us finding a community member. Education law, the conflicts are everywhere, guys. I mean, I can't represent, I've gone against Cedar Rapids, I've gone against Marion, I've gone against Linn-Mar, and I'm just one little tiny person. So I think it gets tricky. So I don't think we should be too pro-local. As much, look, I'm pro-local in general, you know that. But I think this is gonna be tough. Education law, it's not everybody practices it. It's not that.
Well, we can make, like, we don't have, our bus companies out of state. So it's not like we don't make those decisions, because when we find a better deal, because it's just one factor of cost, expertise, and if it's not here, you know, there's clearly another bus company in Iowa that can serve us, and so we go to Illinois.
Yeah, but conflict's different than that.
Well, it is, but
It's not, it's about avoiding conflict, JP.
Sure, and I'm just saying, it's a factor
Yeah.
to consider.
So Matt, I should know this, but I don't. So we have a separate attorney for special ed at this point, right?
Yeah, we do
And
use,
others.
yep.
And
Yep.
then this one that you're talking, that we work with now, that's for other things.
Yeah. it's-
Right, so,
Okay.
yeah, the school corporation has to have counsel, right? And so
Right.
that's
Right, and there are a
been
lot of
Joe's
lawyers
firm,
present
Holland
when we
firm.
did the grievance. I'm like, oh, you're a lawyer for that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
everybody got
It
good
gets,
And that's why Crystal represented you guys, right? Because they're the assigned one for the district, you guys are the district, right? We were the admin team in that instance and had to find our own counsel, so.
Right.
But for special ed, I mean, our agreement with Joe has been that we use Allers for special ed issues. The other factor is sometimes our insurance company will assign it out to a different attorney. I mean, that's,
Okay.
you're gonna hear, you know, some legal updates Tuesday night in our closed session, right? We'll give you probably a good idea about some of the variety of things we have going on. And so, yeah, I mean, we are used to working with different firms and different groups.
The only other thing I would add,
Yeah.
based on our conversations we've had, is lawyers know we're not a permanent hire. Like they know we move on. Like
Yeah.
there's no sensitivity about lawyers. Their job is to find
Yeah.
clients. So like they're not gonna. There's no hard feelings when you change representation.
That's just
are
the
you
way.
saying lawyers aren't
I'm sorry.
sensitive?
Oh, no.
Not the good ones, JP.
I mean, they really aren't. If your client's like, this isn't working, or we don't want to pay you a
Okay,
reduced
yeah.
rate, they're like, yeah, no kidding, because that's the game, and that's the deal, right? So we don't have to worry about that. It's
Oh,
about finding
probably, yes.
the best in the RFP
Closed
that we
session.
think is going to be the most qualified.
Yeah, we have to add that after.
can.
Okay.
We didn't have this discussion, we just had a board vote that was emotional and contentious about firing our lawyer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That was a
Like,
hot mess.
Night one.
That's the best
Wow.
way to put it.
So this is really helpful, that we can have a conversation and not just be at the board table with like, what's going on?
Gotcha. All right, geez, okay, yeah. I need to know.
It was.
So this RFP would be
intense.
for all legal services, like look again at special ed?
Well, I think what we would probably present in an RFP out to the community would be, of course, for general counsel, somebody has to represent us in that general counsel capacity. I do think what the team would work through would be areas we think we probably need some specialized help. Like if it was going to be an out-of-community firm that submitted, I think we'd also probably want to have some caveat in there about working with a local firm for real estate land purchases.
Yeah.
That could create visits that we don't necessarily want to pay somebody from outside. But typically, like when we're going through an issue, it's kind of both. I mean, that person can do a lot of things from Des Moines in an IP issue. I mean, the first time we might see them is the actual time we get to a hearing aspect or something that way. So I think those are the types of things we'd want to consider, high-level special ed issues, some local real estate transactions, how they work and interplay with our insurance carrier when something gets submitted to insurance, and what their perspective on that situation would be. I thought I had another example in my head, but
Employee.
yeah, and then employee relations and working through those issues. So
So, can you explain a little bit how this process works then? We put it out.
yeah, so kind of just where we're positioned in our meeting schedule. I think what would most likely, I'm hoping I would get enough feedback here today that we could go build an RFP you guys would be okay with, and we would submit it out, and then we'd bring you back the results of that RFP and have a conversation about who you'd want to select from there.
Is it one RFP or is it something where we do need to do separate RFPs for those?
I don't know yet. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, I think, is like how much diversity you want to have in that, and if we could build it into one and get multiple submissions, or if we'd have to put out different RFPs.
Okay.
I just, for example, again, the special education law, I know we have a firm that does that, and I would hate to see them not submit an RFP because it's built in with a whole bunch of other stuff that they
Agreed.
don't do.
Agree.
So I think
Break
what,
it apart.
what I'm hearing
And if you're
is-
able to fulfill all of the buckets, if you're a big firm and you have 5 people to fill all the buckets, then by all means submit under all 5. But I think we need to provide the flexibility for the people that specialize in just one area to target that and say, no, I still want to be your special ed counsel.
So that goes back to you were just naming the hot button issues. So if we use those as the separate sort of specialized areas, special education, real estate.
Yeah, a carve out for real
Immigration.
estate.
I know we have
Whoa.
an immigration attorney right now. That's highly specialized.
So right now, does the attorney you're using contract with these other people to do that? No. Okay.
No,
We hire that.
Yeah, we hire
We
out
hire
for a
special
lot of
ed,
those
immigration.
specialized areas.
that's just been kind of our working arrangement with Joe, has been that we use ours for special ed issues, yeah.
But I would say that's very good to say, immigration carve out, that's not something you're gonna run into conflict with, guys. Real estate, everybody does real estate law here. You can get local, you're not gonna have a conflict. So really important, carve out, and if you think of others, that's very good. Also just wanna backtrack for a moment because my brain is sizzling. When I drive to meet a client, I'm spending the whole time preparing to meet the client. I'm not chilling. So I just want to be real clear, you don't drive to a case, like a court case, and just chill the whole time. You're sitting there, I record my arguments and I listen to them, usually I have a paralegal going over the case with you. Just wanted to say, I heard the time when I'm driving.
Not sure that, you got that, Kim?
I do.
It felt real weird
You
afterwards.
fit in
I was
Baca.
like, wait, they're
They're not just cruising along, getting their salary.
She's not listening to serial killer cop.
No.
which I love, by the way.
Okay, guys, glad she got that.
Clarify, running out of coffee.
Oh my God. Matt, do you have enough for you and your team to put that out, or do you have more questions for us?
No, I think so. Can you guys just maybe say out loud the things you were thinking of for a carve out one more time? I was wanting to,
Special ed,
yeah.
immigration, litigation,
Employment law?
Yeah, well, yeah, I would like to see the employment law be litigators,
I
right?
guess, yeah, I would. Usually
So
are.
employment litigation,
Real estate.
real estate, and general.
Yeah.
That's 6.
Because I do think the real estate, with the school bidding process, I just remember from what we did through TREC, there are some state statutes that affect the disposition of real estate owned or acquired by the district.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so it seems a little enough specialized.
Good call.
that- Yeah.
So I had immigration, special ed, real estate, employment, general. That's 5 to me, and you said 6.
Oh.
Oh,
It's
and-
fine, because they combined
You had
employment
something
litigation.
about, you said insurance, but I wasn't sure what.
Oh,
That's
how they
just how we
play with
work
our
with our
insurance
insurance.
company.
Right,
We're-
so I didn't know if you needed.
A lot of things are insured,
Yeah.
and if it's a coverable claim, then our insurance company finds us an attorney.
So that's just
Yeah.
probably how, yeah,
So
that would
that's
be
sort
spelled
of-
I
out.
think you got it.
Okay.
You got it.
Yeah,
Alright.
but general should then, of course, include knowledge of
Yeah, just the
school-related
basic ed law.
law, school
Yeah.
law. So,
Yeah.
yeah. General/education.
So our organizational meeting is the 29th. So for sure by the 29th, we're going to want to be recommending whatever our approach is. We do have another meeting on the
Is that
15th.
enough time?
It's plenty of time to run the RFP process. I'm thinking about how we just structure that with, if you guys would want to see the RFP to react to it before we put it out, then we get tighter on time because you wouldn't be able to see it till the 15th.
I would say I'm comfortable
Yeah,
with,
if we do those areas.
Okay.
yeah, I'm comfortable with it, and I know, like, if the two of these guys are meeting with you to brush it over, she obviously has a background in this. You know,
Okay.
there's a meeting of the minds about this. Does anyone have concerns about it?
No.
So I defer.
All right. Yeah, that's plenty of time then. We'll
And I would
get
assume
this
you're gonna work with
constructed.
Chase on it
Yeah,
too, because I
exactly.
think
Oh, yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, I
There
just
you go.
assumed
Yep.
that.
If
So,
you
but
all
that's
do it
good.
wrong,
Putting it
doing
in.
the forward
Yeah.
deal, shame on you.
No.
We just blame Chase, because he's not.
No, it's
here
good,
this
and I have a
morning.
couple samples from other districts in the
Good.
UEN when they've switched theirs, so we have some starting points that we've talked about working this from, so.
Great. So next on the agenda is an open enrollment conversation.
Okay.
Unless people, I mean, we are a few minutes ahead of time, unless people need a comfort break. Okay, let's keep rolling.
Okay, so open enrollment, let me get switched over here. We had the situation that occurred here a month or two ago with the family that was open enrolling out of the district, and the board was presented the question around waiving or not waiving the ineligibility period. And really, this has been a change with the new open enrollment date set by the state, that now the local boards can also decide to waive varsity athletic eligibility. It's in the past had a 90-day penalty that has applied to varsity athletics if you were to open enroll, unless it was one of the identified good cause exceptions. The thing we're frustrated, honestly, a little bit with the state is, if you notice all the attached documents that have been provided on both of these, that's what we have to sort through to find all of the good cause ones. They're not even all listed in the same place. The most difficult one to find is the bullying and harassment portion of that. It's not listed in their general list of good cause exceptions, but it is codified in state code. So we had presented to you, and probably not sufficiently enough, a general practice that what we were going to do is we were just going to take the approach of denying all requests to have eligibility or the ineligibility period waived unless it was one of those state identified exceptions. I think we are going to hit some heartache with that approach because there's going to be some things that fall outside of those. We've already seen an example of one. I think we were on the heels of seeing an example of another one. And so we wanted to have this conversation before we get to Tuesday around what would you guys like to see as an approach to this? Because there are going to be examples that fall outside of those state identified exceptions that are going to cause you, I think, to think and reflect about if we're doing the right thing. And I think that's natural, that's part of it. But we also have to have some policy that guides our work, because I also don't think it's a healthy scenario for you guys to get into these on a regular basis and have to hear the stories and evaluate those, knowing you're going to have less information than probably our team at most points of this, be put on the spot in front of people and be presented with that information all in the same time without a lot of time to process. So again, I attached a lot of documents there. I think the initial suggestion I could provide around this would be kind of twofold. The first would be if there is a student coming into the district, it may be safest for us as a district just to take and respect the approach of the sending district, that if they've decided to waive it, that we will follow suit. Their local board has determined it, their admin teams worked with their board, they've said, they've evaluated with more facts than we're probably going to have in a scenario, and we just would say we're going to simply respect the decision of the sending school board, and if they waive the ineligibility period, we will in turn accept the student and waive the ineligibility period too. If they upheld it, we're going to respect their decision that there must be a compelling reason they decided to do that, and we would also then keep the ineligibility period in play. That could work there, and I see some positive head nods. The other part of it, though, is going to be what about when a student leaves our district? I do think we have to have some guide rails, again, for that. And maybe it's some considerations outside of those state-identified good cause exceptions, but for us to be recommending what to do for a student that decides to leave our district and go want to play varsity athletics in another school, we should probably have something that guides our decision. Maybe that is just the state-identified good cause, but one that's not, that you're not going to find on there is one we've already dealt with. Another one could be mental health concerns. Another one could be not having some academic success at their school that goes beyond what is identified already through the school improvement process that's identified in code. I had another example here too, but now I'm talking from my head instead of from my notes here a little bit. But there's going to be examples that fall outside of that. And I think the long-term risk, if we play this all the way through, is if we start creating a lot of exceptions for students to be able to leave our district and compete immediately in varsity athletics in another district without any kind of guide rail for that, you're going to have internal movement inside of the district that's not going to feel very good to anybody. You could have students participating in an athletic event on Tuesday night on one side of town, having some type of a conflict, some type of a concern, saying that they want to transfer schools, and then competing on another side of town the next week. And I think that's going to lead to some poor adult behavior too, that we're going to be dealing with, because while our staff is great, I think that, competition brings out different things in different people, and they are going to start having conversations with kids about coming to the different places to play. I think that's what's going to happen on the state level, honestly, guys. I mean, you're going to see more of that, but we don't want that in our district as much as possible. So I'm not doing a very good job here with this initial explanation about drawing the connection between open enrollment and what I think could happen internally if we're not careful. But I do think that's a real risk for us, is if we start allowing and providing things for kids coming outside of our district, into our district, or for those students leaving our district, more flexibility for them than those that even are in our district have internally, we're going to be in a really difficult spot in a hurry with some things. So I would start with probably asking for some feedback. Maybe let's just focus on that first one around, okay, if it's a sending district and the kids coming into Iowa City, does that approach sound reasonable, that we're just going to say we uphold the opposing, school?
I personally think so, because you're right. They will have more knowledge than what we have, where we don't have the time to investigate and sort of weigh any of the claims, if it's bullying, sort of they engage their mental health concerns. I like that. I think that's clean, easy, simple.
Do sending districts, does the board always weigh in on open enrollment?
Both of them have to vote yes.
But I mean, weigh in on if we should waive the athletic eligibility or not.
They have the right to, but similar to you guys and how our local board policy states, most of the time they designate that to the superintendent. Now, every open enrollment for us appears on your agenda. You have the final say on those. You are provided with my recommendations about what to do there. Not every board, I would say, is as tight in process to that as we are, right? I mean, you're going to have some boards that you won't see names on an agenda. You're just going to get a phone call from the superintendent saying, Matt, here's what we did.
So like this current one that maybe we're talking about, did that sending board say you should waive the athletic eligibility?
The next, in this next case, without getting into the specifics of that situation, yes, we've seen things from local boards that have said we would be willing to waive it. And then our take was going to be, it's not one of the state identified exceptions. We would think, our position would be not to waive the ineligibility. But I would say that didn't feel very good. So that's again why we're here, right?
And the transfer rules, which is in district, that they also carry the 90-day waiting period, but we're not necessarily talking about that right now. We're really focused on the open enrollment piece. But how it might affect, sorry, I'm just talking out loud.
You're okay.
How it might affect then the transfer.
Right, I think it's the domino effect,
Fred from Cedar Rapids gets to come play right away, but me at Liberty, I can't go to Weston right away.
Yeah. And we're pretty restricted on transfers now.
Yeah.
I think, again, like Molly did a nice job of saying there, we're trying to forecast what this decision, how it'll impact another decision that you'll be presented with, right? And so while we're pretty restricted on secondary transfers and have tightened that up, I think you're going to be put in a position of more transfer requests, more opportunity for people asking that they should be able to change schools internally in the district if we're allowing kids in and out based on these similar reasons. Yeah.
The one thing I want to flag for the first scenario, the easy one,
Yeah.
is I'd like to build into the policy that we will not agree to waive the eligibility period until the sending district first has made that decision.
Timing's important.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of this
We're
is
gonna
that we
delay
don't want you
anything
guys
until they
doing
have
the
it. Yep.
investigation.
Right.
Yeah.
And we need to be clear, we will not say yes until that decision. I don't want students to say, well, if you say yes,
They'll say
then
yes.
Clear Creek
Yes.
said they would
Yeah.
say yes, so you,
No, you need
I don't
a
want to do that.
decision from
The
the
only
city
way we
board.
waive
Yeah.
is if the sending district has already
Yes.
waived.
Yeah, they gotta do the work on their.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's just micromanagement on our part.
Yes.
We don't know what-
Well, and then we get trapped between
And
those.
that's possible, right, Matt? That's what I mean,
Yes.
Okay.
We will just simply say we're not going to answer. We're not going to answer the question. We're delaying a recommendation until
Yeah.
we have a
Or
decision
the
from
answer is
sending
no.
district. Yeah.
Until.
Until, we will not waive
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
the sending district has said yes.
or made their decision.
Because I think, correct, until they've made their decision. Because I think that reading that code, there may be a way that that we would have to vote on it, that they could
They
force
could
a
force
vote.
us and they
even
could
if,
force
and
the
so
ask
I
here.
want it to be
Yeah.
clear that the policy then is, we are not, if we're forced to, we are not waiving until the sending district has
Made their
agreed to
decision.
waive.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to force us to vote,
We're gonna
we
vote
will, and
no.
the answer is no.
Yeah, yeah, that's the point.
So sending district can force another district?
The student.
So I agree with that. I think that it, as you framed it, it's easier. But with that rule about timing. So with the other issue, open enrollment, and that the code language, and it's true, it is confusing. I mean, I went through it and highlighted it all over again, and I've used those code sections. It's always confusing.
It's in 95 different places.
It
That's
is.
the thing. Yeah.
It is, and it's not the same lettering for the different ones.
Yep.
And I've had to argue the good cause for players. I think the one thing I always have to remind myself is this is for eligibility for varsity play. This
It's
is
not
not
to get
about
in,
going to
it's not-
school.
no.
Okay, so just, I forget that as I get into it, right? This is about eligibility to play a varsity sport. Okay, so as long as we keep that in our mind.
To compete.
To compete, you can still
Right.
practice, you can still play
practice,
JV
you
games.
can- Right, you just can't
Oh, yeah.
compete at the varsity.
Oh, yeah, you
Yeah.
just can't compete with varsity. So that's important, right? Put some context on it. Now, having said that, I was at that City High game last night. 3 people came up and talked to a coach there about who was there that wasn't supposed to be and how come that person got to open and roll out, or and is this person open and rolling in? Just so you know, it's real hot. I mean, this is a real big deal for the community because, shockingly, sports really matter in the United States of America. Okay, so open enrollment is, we are considered the resident district. If someone's leaving us, we're the resident district and the other district is the receiving district, so 2 R's. So if we're the resident district and a kid comes to us and says, I really want to go to Clear Creek Humana, and these are my reasons, I would feel much more comfortable knowing we had a policy that said, these are the reasons that we will let you do it. And right now, as Matt said, there are reasons in the code, good cause, for example. Then there's a new one about harassment and bullying. So, figuring out if we want to add to that or not. I am not comfortable making ad hoc decisions based on the case that comes before us. So my opinion is I would like more help from policy.
And I totally agree with that. The only thing that I don't think I heard you say is that I am not for then, outside of those state good causes and the bullying one, to have then this whole other list of things, hypotheticals that we work through. Because if you have a policy with a bunch of exceptions, really not a good policy.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's somebody can find a way to weed themselves through it. So I totally agree with what Maka was saying, with adding on that I am not for now creating a whole bunch of exceptions.
But you're talking about open enrollment itself, not waiving the athletic eligibility?
No,
This is all about the athletic
You were still
eligibility
talking about
waiver.
Right,
That's
right.
the
Just
only
the
thing we're
athletics,
talking
yeah.
I
about.
wasn't, I thought you
Yeah.
were.
No,
yeah,
so-
we're talking about that.
If they
because-
want to go, we
I'm
have
not
to
gonna
let them
judge
out.
them.
Right.
This is
Right,
all
we
I'm
let 'em
talking
out.
about.
Yeah, that's-
So here's my question, and I think like to get the framework in my head straight. If you transfer, if you open and enroll to another district because of a founded bullying and harassment issue, your eligibility is waived, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's in code. So you're not talking about a bullying and harassment situation. That's already taken care of. If your family moves houses, right? You physically move, and so now you're in a different district, and so you have to go.
It's not open enrollment.
Your
it's just
your eligibility is waived, right?
Right.
Because it's not.
So we're not talking about kids who move. They're taken care of. Who are we talking about?
We're talking about kids that want to go play for their sister.
So yeah, no, but I mean we're not
seriously,
talking.
I'm just saying
But
things
Matt,
like that.
I heard mental health though. So maybe you have a mental health issue that doesn't rise to a founded bullying and harassment
Because then
claim.
we have to play psychologists, psychiatrists to dive into their mental health claims.
So if you're looking at,
So this is the
Yeah.
best list, but it still doesn't include bullying and harassment. It's in a different code section. It's actually like chapter 36 or something. This is 282. But good cause here, this is all the things it would include, right? When it would be waived automatically, you get to play varsity athletics right away. The one you don't find in this list that's frustrating to us as we navigate through these to make sure we have all the considerations comprehensively looked at would be the bullying and harassment. But it is in code. When I sit back down, I can tell you where it's at.
I can
You
tell you.
can find it through there.
Oh, she has it highlighted.
But, so the things we're talking about, yeah, I think are for, if there's a special circumstance, what if they say there's a mental health concern and they need to, they want to transfer districts? What if there's some kind of academic opportunity they want to pursue in another district? I mean, there's going to be things that I think Mary Kate's point around making those decisions there when you potentially have a line of commenters telling you why this is good for the kid is going to be really hard to say no to on a consistent basis. And so I do think we want some frame of reference for us to know also what you guys are going to support if you get into one of those, because this isn't going to prevent you from not being in that situation. It's about what are we going to be able to work together to say we can live with that, right? We can uphold situations that fall into these categories. We don't feel good about not waiving ineligibility for situations that fall over here. I will say the challenge with any of those, the gamut is so large, and it's going to be really hard to judge. I mean, we struggle with being able to judge those things. We just went through online program enrollments for the last 2 years, and trying to tell one family that their mental health situation isn't significant in comparison to another one, even though when the supporting documentation we have may convince us that one has a more compelling reason than another, that's a loser deal spot to be in, right? We don't want to be in that role. We don't want to be telling somebody that it is or it isn't. So that gets hard if that becomes one of the categories. I think, again, anything, our recommendation, honestly, as I think about this, would be to stay with this list. It is your best way to arm yourselves with information about what are we making exceptions for and what are we not.
so the language, as he said, it's the good cause, and those are all listed. And then the bullying provision reads, the student open enrolls from a district of residence that has determined that the student was previously subject to a founded incident of harassment or bullying as defined by the Iowa Code. And that's a pretty big description. I mean, that the Iowa Code is
pretty.
yeah. So it's a long list there, and then you've got bullying. So to add to it is everything that you're not seeing on that list.
Is it feasible to have different policies for intra-district transfers and outer? Because here's what I'll say. I'm a little bit of a softie on these, as I think you guys know, but I could see, for example, a transgendered student from a different district who, because of our legislature, has to play on a team that they don't identify with. The teammates are hostile. The school decides that it's not harassment, it's not bullying, but this student wants to transfer because of mental health concerns, and they want to play their sport.
Then they wait 90 days.
It's
But you're talking-
but
but no,
that, to
no.
me, that is a compelling circumstance that
But you're
I
talking
feel
about coming
bad.
from another district.
Yes.
So
But-
again,
and-
we're
and-
going to go
and
with
my
whatever
point-
the other district says.
That's
That's what.
Oh, okay. Because
So they may
I don't
not-
think that happens here. Like, I'm not
Right.
concerned about students
Building to building.
building
yeah,
to building.
Right.
That's why I wanted to know, because I think we do good work here and that we stop those, but you're right, that
We
student
send-
could come
Yeah.
if they're released.
Yeah, they
because
could
they're
come.
from outside.
We're going to say whatever their
Okay.
district.
Okay, well, that
do.
makes me feel,
I think,
because
yeah.
I don't trust necessarily that all districts in Iowa are making comfortable
Okay.
environments for their students who are different.
So to your point though.
But we've solved
I think,
that.
no, we didn't. I think it will happen.
Yeah.
That the sending district doesn't, maybe for the reasons you're describing, doesn't waive it.
Well, then it doesn't matter what we do. Both districts have to agree.
Okay, as
Yeah.
long as you're
Yeah.
agreeing that we're still sticking with it. We're not gonna say, well, but it really feels like.
No, we,
the
but the
Yeah.
way the law works is even if we said yes, if they say no, it's not waived. So it doesn't matter what we do. If they don't waive it, that student's not getting eligible. So that's out of our control.
Yeah, both boards have to agree.
Yeah.
Jane, you were saying something.
No, I was just agreeing.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's kind of, yeah.
So,
The basic thing with the approach to our policy is you guys would avoid having to get in the weeds about even really hearing any kind of substantive nature of that, because the other one, we're going to wait till after their decision. If they're a no, then we're not even hearing really the substantive argument, because it doesn't matter what we do. If they're a yes, then we're going to take action to then uphold that they said yes to waive it, right?
So, and I think the concern about it being, about it having to apply, the same rules having to apply to intra-district transfers, I think that's a very real concern. And anyone who has kids playing high school ball, you're gonna hear about it all the time. I mean, people will, and I go to the union about these too, the athletic union, people will lie.
They will
To get their-
pretend to move
I mean,
somewhere
it's
else,
crazy.
set up an apartment.
They'll get
City
mental health diagnoses if they had.
I mean, I've done home visits, guys. Molly knows from my last role. I would go to
No, I know.
apartments
I
that
just
people
know.
say this is now where we're moving. We
Yeah.
moved to the east side of town
Yeah.
or to the west side of town.
And then there's
Then
no
you go in,
furniture
you try to
to
see,
say.
yeah, oh, well, there's no furniture here. There's nothing in the refrigerator or, you know, but how intrusive do you want to be, right? It just sets us up in all of these
Right.
really
Awful
difficult
ways.
examples. So
But
I
I'd
th-
also philosophically, it's a problem to what you said when you were presenting this to us. This is about school choice. You guys,
Right.
as
Yes.
this happens, small districts will be gutted, okay? And intra-district, just so we're clear, there are schools already in our high schools that are known for better sports than others, and it will have a big impact on our school, okay? I mean, that's a reality. So we have to be very sensitive about the flow of people transferring and open enrolling. It is not good for public education to make that easy. But if you're dealing with Reynolds administration, that's totally ignored. So it's about
this is how
school
they
choice.
achieved school choice
Yeah, this is school
without
choice.
the vouchers last time. This
Yeah.
was a late add-in. It was
Yeah.
all as a result of not getting
And it
what they wanted from a legislative standpoint on school choice. And so I think Monica's exactly right. And the other thing is, I mean, we do have a selfish interest about trying to keep kids in our district. We have a whole menu of supports and offerings to provide our students, right? And so
Yes.
concerns outside of one of these good cause exceptions, we not only should have the responsibility to take care of, but we should be held accountable to take care of those kids in our district. And
Yeah,
so,
that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
If it's in our control, like I said, Lisa, that you appreciate that we do good work. Well, if we don't, we have control of that. If somebody's not doing good work there, we can
fix it.
fix that.
Yep.
Right? That's in our thing. Mental health, the same thing. If you're not getting mental health supports, and again, it doesn't take away our ability if some outlier case happens. Like we still can hear it in public. We have that power because something's going to happen that we. Now, what I don't want is every single time we have to sit there and vote and hear community, but it, because people can come to us, whatever, right? They can decide to come to the board. But if we have a really strong policy and we can just default to that, still 1 or 2% of the time, maybe it's just something nobody ever thought of.
It could be, yeah.
And then we say, well, so I don't want to predict those ahead of time.
Right.
Because that's that laundry list of exceptions. But, any given board, whether it's us or new people, still has the ability to overturn itself on any given Tuesday night. That's never gone.
And I want to be clear that the way that I interpret the statute is the admin team cannot prevent a student from asking the board to, so this doesn't, even if we have a great policy, it doesn't mean that we're not going to have a lot of asks. It just means that we have a good policy,
We have a policy
to fall
that
back
we're
on
agreeing
to say
uphold.
Yeah.
it doesn't fall in that. But
And
I
we
don't
present you
want
guys
to be
with
like,
the-
why are we getting 10 of
Yeah.
these requests? Because
No.
they're entitled to
Right.
them and we have to follow the policy.
Well, we're also getting them already, like even last night.
So I was
a
just gonna
woman
say.
came up to me and said, I know you guys waived X, and so you better waive Y. I mean, the kids know all of it,
Mhm.
and their parents know all of it. And that's why we need to keep that in mind as we move forward. Yes, there will be weird situations, but I can't stress enough how important it will be for us to stick to it. And the governor the legislators gave us the right to overrule our superintendent. And that's a separate section in the code, okay? So that's what, at any point next year, whoever gets a feather about it can be like, yeah, but we can still overrule him. So this conversation is about how careful we want to be about overruling it.
Right.
You know?
Right, because we want to bring, you guys are going to see all of the requests, right? But you're going to see it through what we're recommending to do with those. And so I think that's the assumption you should operate from, is really that any kid that's serious about varsity athletics or wants to play varsity athletics has made that request at the time to do that. And so then you're going to see our recommendation, and I think that's where we want to be on the same page as much as possible, because there is a larger agenda at play here that, okay, this is school choice, this is pitting local boards against their team and against their community for these really difficult situations, and it starts to create a lot of infighting. So we want to protect ourselves from that portion of it. That is important.
You know the school up at Clear Lake, that district? Matt Degner, you might know about this better than I do. They used this new legislation. So basically segregated schools are being created up there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that there's wealth flight, there's white flight, and it's creating segregation.
Well, because
That's-
did you guys catch in the code they made
Yeah.
you get rid of your diversity plans? So Waterloo, Davenport.
Yeah.
That's why at enrollment
happening
time,
already.
I don't think we probably grew as fast as I thought we would. We might be up about 45 kids is what we're certifying at. But I mean, we could quickly be ahead of Davenport and Cedar Rapids because of the amount of kids they're going to lose to not being, because of the open enrollment rule, Davenport specifically, because they can't have that diversity plan in place anymore. So they're going to hemorrhage kids to Pleasant Valley, to Bettendorf. Bettendorf closed themselves to open enrollment this year, so it hasn't happened there yet. But that is going to be the other dynamic of this, is that some of your urban centers are going to lose a drastic amount of kids through that process. And it's not going to be your socially disadvantaged kids. It's going to be your affluent folks that decide to go to a different district.
Back to open enrollment, one of the things you said was maybe there's a program that a unique program that a student wants.
What if they want ag and FFA and we don't have it?
Well, here's my question. Say the City High building program, construction program, right? Can a kid from West go over
Yes.
for that program
Yes.
now, right? Like
Yep.
we wouldn't see that problem in our district
No.
because our programs are open to everyone.
No,
Right.
So it would really, that's just a kid that wants to go out of the district for special program.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I thought
And then
earlier.
what my head says is that's not common enough that we should have a policy
No.
about.
And isn't that
Like,
a different
but-
thing? Like, I remember we had a West kid that went to West Branch.
Right, we would problem solve that situation.
Right, and so
anyways,
that's not
yeah.
necessarily an
Yeah.
open enrollment.
Yeah, we would try to create, and you guys approved one of those this year, I think.
Yeah.
Because it was
Couple of them,
West
yeah.
Branch this year?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
same thing. So we try to partner with them so we can give them that experience so we don't lose the student, right? Yeah.
Okay,
So, yeah, that's, yeah.
yeah.
So I think it's important, if I'm hearing folks, staying with the list, that's the good cause exception with the added bullying and harassment, founded bullying and harassment.
Which is
Is
in the
that-
code.
Right, which is
That
in the
could
code, just not easily found under the good cause list.
And then that could just be the same for intra. like going from school to school.
Yeah.
Same.
Well, we don't
Yeah,
have to do
we
anything
wanna-
different there yet. I think the whole reason about talking about inside the district is just having an understanding of that what you do with this scenario
Is
will inherently connect to what people expect you to do inside the
So
district,
if we're
especially
consistent,
so I think
Yeah.
if we're
Yep.
if we're set on this, I think we avoid most of that problem for
Yep.
the time being.
And
Yeah.
you don't think we need a mental health exception that is somehow different than bullying and harassment?
Not for students leaving the district. I mean, I think our continuum of supports here is such that the only thing that I feel like in the Iowa City Community School District we couldn't offer to a student around mental health is what is a good cause exception, a mental health treatment program. You know, that would be the only thing that would potentially pull a family. I mean, we would even problem solve that situation enough that we would offer different campuses if it was
But
to
that is an
level.
exception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mental
What?
health treatment, so.
Yeah.
Mental health
residential.
treatment program.
Okay.
Yes.
That is-
Participation in
So if a kid is
substance
sent to a
abuse.
residential,
That's what I,
Right,
yeah.
because I mean, we
That's
just
Yeah.
sort of did something like that under special ed.
Yeah, but it wasn't for, yeah.
It wasn't open enroll, but I mean, we.
But we've
we
tuitioned
would
into
problem
kids.
solve to
Yeah.
pay for those
we
services,
don't have
that's
it.
what I mean.
Yep.
Yeah.
What's wrong?
So, we are good.
Yep.
Moving right along then, we're
All right.
a few minutes early.
So what I owe you guys is probably maybe some more specifics in our open enrollment about how we're going to handle these, and that we should probably do that through a P&G review and then put it on board policy. Of course, we'll work from this operating principle for the time being, but we'll put it into policy for you guys to approve them too.
So we are a few minutes ahead. We'll take a little bit of a break and get started in the next 10 minutes.
Sounds good.
All right,
Great.
started, guys.
Any part of that.
We're gonna dive in. The next two things probably will go quickly. It's just some board housekeeping. Once a year, we like to check in and see what people's thoughts are, where we're at, how we're feeling about the board norms. They're probably not new for most of us. Molly probably saw them first time on the retreat agenda, but just wanted to lend a few minutes to a conversation if everyone still feels good about those norms that we have. And it's just what we are agreeing, how we're agreeing to behave and serve as board members. So with that, I'll open it up to anybody that has discussions about or thoughts.
So I didn't know about these, missed that somehow until, the agenda. So I read it over and I talked to a former board member about where they came from, and I wasn't surprised that, how they came to be. My concern with these are, and the board member I spoke to, the previous board member disagreed with me, so I realize I may not have the win on this, but I feel that they're a little informal for board governance. I would prefer these to be either formalized in a policy or added to an existing policy which do exist. I'm just concerned, especially when I noted that these are available on the website, the school district website. I find these to be more of something that happened if you have a retreat and you put it up on a whiteboard and then talk about it and talk about how you're going to get along better and do all these things. But to formalize it and put it into a document and make it available to the public feels a little bit informal to me. And you'll know, if you don't already, I really like to have things formalized because I just think it is a good system. So my feedback is I see some good things here. I'm not sure what some of these mean, but I'll see what other people ask. But my point of view is this should not be on a website, and it should be formalized and made into a policy.
So I have some thoughts on that. I agree with you. I think the value in this is the process that brought you to it, in that it's team building, and that kind of putting this on the website as is secondary. It's really the process that you came to as a team to decide that this is the way we want to behave as a board, and there's value in that. I did look around at other districts in the state of Iowa, and they do incorporate a lot of the way they want their board to behave and interact with each other into their board policies. I think Des Moines, for instance, does a good job of it. And so if you wanted to make these policies more formal, I think that's something that we can take a look at the P&G committee.
And I would say, just so we're not reinventing the wheel, my guess is ASB has some boilerplate stuff that we could just
Yep.
modify as we need, but that covers a lot of these. I mean, that's, I think, the spirit of it, that is there. You know, that, a lot of this, I think, is in the spirit of the kind of things that IASB promotes as far as how boards function and what our norms should be.
Yeah.
And so we might be able to, and maybe, I would imagine districts did the same thing.
Here's my question, and I don't mean this like as aggressive as it's going to sound, but I'm just genuinely curious, and I'm fine with putting this in policy, but you know, what's the remedy if a board member violates policy, right? There is none, right? I mean, and I think we all are on board generally with these norms, but I could see an election down the road where, you know, somebody gets elected who's more of a contrarian and individual and says, I'm not following any of these norms and I don't care if it's policy. I mean, there's no remedy, right?
So, but that's not about us formalizing this, you're saying separately.
Well, we can
there's no
formalize
remedy.
it, but what good does it do? I mean, we can have a formal policy, but if we have a rogue board member, we can't hold them accountable. They're elected.
But can't you censure them? I mean, isn't that?
Could do that, but that doesn't have any.
Doesn't have any.
No.
But at least we'd
Okay.
have it, and
Yeah.
people running for the board would know it was true. If it was me that was being contrary, then somebody could say, Molly, look at this, you know, really you ought to think about this, so.
Yeah.
I have a question about formal, like why do we call each other director blah blah? That just seems weird to me.
It does to me too, especially since we call people in the room by their first name. So as a teacher, I didn't like it when I was called by my first name, and we called my principal Mr. So-and-so. So that's when I started to be sensitive to that.
Yeah.
And then, as a lawyer, we had old school attorneys who called staff by their first names. But we were to call each other, the lawyers, by Ms. and Mr., actually Mrs. and Ms. But anyway, I would like to consider whether it's a good idea to do that. It feels a little performative to me as well.
Yeah.
And again, this is one, I've never thought about it feeling performative. I often feel it's unnecessary, but I also want to convey to the public the gravity of what we do from the board table. And I don't want them to think that we're not taking it seriously or that we're too informed. So that's
We're just
personally
a
why
bunch of friends
I
that
do
are
it,
chatting. Okay.
is to try to, and if I think about it, I do try to say, you know, Assistant Superintendent Courtmeyer, but it really
Or
gets to be a mouthful at some point.
Sometimes I say Director Lucas because I forget.
That's okay, that's just a mistake.
But no, I mean, I try, if I'm talking to sort of admin, I try to act in that role because and I'm just gonna say, I have heard when I don't call people director, Pilcher Hyatt.
I hate that I have two
I'm
last names.
just
and
saying, I do
say
too.
that.
That was kind of
I do too. But
Just-
it's,
I know, I'm one of the
you're not
problems here.
professional,
No.
or you think you're just standing on the street
Sure,
corner.
I'm sure
And
there's
it
another
could be
scope.
because the way I look, I don't know. So
Yep,
for
who knows?
me,
Okay.
I like the formality of, I'm in this role, we're in a professional setting meeting. I am going to try and call you Director Abraham,
Okay.
Director Finch, Super
So that was just kind of
Gettner.
a sidebar.
So,
It
yeah.
just felt really odd to me.
It's actually part of this.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do then, I'm fine with it. I do think we need to do it across the board. I really think it's not okay to call people in front of us by their first names, if
gotta
we are
learn
not
how
being
to
called by
say
our
it.
first name. I think that's
Yeah,
a
no.
respect thing.
Well,
For the same
I want to
reasons
be
you
clear
want
that
that, I
everyone
agree.
can call me Lisa.
What'd you say?
Everyone can call me Lisa.
Oh,
I mean, that's how I
If
feel.
people call me JP, I write it down in my little book. And I read it every time, and believe me, people will pay.
And I'll say, I think it goes along a little bit with the point Ruthina was trying to make. I'm perceived as young when I go places, and when I don't call people Mr. or Mrs. in my life experience, I've been told that I'm being disrespectful because I don't know my place and I can't call you Bob or Sally. And so I think that's just a life experience that some of us have and some of us don't, and that's why we do it. I would prefer not to do it though, but I'm worried about what people will say and how they will perceive me
Yeah.
as a director if I don't.
Yeah. And I'm just being full, I am going to stay with it, and I'm going to make an
Okay.
effort and start referring to our admin team as director or assistant superintendent Courtmeyer.
I can always remember their job titles.
Yeah. I can tell you, I don't think our team gets offended just like you guys, right? But I do think you never know who's going to, right, is the problem. And so if you don't have a consistent way you're
Yeah.
doing it, then you are going to at some point hurt somebody's feelings that has a PhD and you're calling them Mr. or Mrs. instead of doctor.
Are we
you know
gonna
what I
call
mean?
people doctors
You know,
with
I mean,
PhDs?
Well, I'm not calling
that's what I'm
Chase
saying though.
Dr.
It's those subtleties where it's like if you don't
But I
have
will
a
call him
consistent,
assistant
yeah.
secretary.
But
Yeah.
that goes back to if
Yeah.
we know, I mean, for me, and you can tell me if I have this wrong, I just assume, I mean, we have 2 assistant superintendent director,
Deputy.
Deputy.
yeah, deputy.
So we'll call him
And
deputy.
Deputy.
There you go.
Yeah, Deputy Rainey, and then everyone else, it would be appropriate as director
Yep.
so-and-so.
Say
Okay, so that's not hard.
So
that's-
everybody is director
Like
except
it?
for him
Amy
and
and Chase.
Courtmeyer and Chase.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean-
Okay.
Okay.
Deputy.
Deputy.
I like deputy.
Deputy.
That is so
That's his
helpful.
own
That's-
nickname.
yeah.
Yeah.
Watch, I'm gonna
Also,
flip up
call
Tuesday
me,
and call him
if you're
Deputy
gonna use
Dog.
my last name, which I don't like doing, just Pilcher, okay? You don't have to say Hyatt.
Pilcher Hyatt.
Listen, I don't apologize for the fact that I have 2 last names.
Pilcher.
Don't even think I will for a minute.
The nameplate
But
up there.
Pilcher's
Yeah.
easier.
Right, Charlie, the
Your
nameplate says Pilcher Hyatt.
Same here.
I'm just messing with you.
I don't know if he is though. Last names for a reason.
But what
Call
I'm
me
hearing,
Pilcher.
what I'm hearing is people sounds as though they want these made into policy, our norms, even with the understanding that violation of them by a board member is very limited, but it goes to what we hold dear and what we believe is important as a board.
Yep.
And just maybe, formalizing like.
So that's something that P&G maybe can tackle
Yes.
and continue that conversation, Matt and Jane.
It would be more visible. I
Yeah.
know this was sort of kind of hidden in the website. We don't even know it's there. And yeah.
Just
Yep,
yet.
so
Keep it in the policy.
P&G,
Awesome.
get it on your agenda.
President Malone.
Oh, right.
I don't think we have to do it as a
Start today.
The retreat, we can be more, this is more like
I-
informal.
I also wanted to say, like, I feel when we do work sessions and committee
Yes,
meetings
that's
and we're around
different.
this table, I mean, it does
It
just
feel-
feel less
it is.
formal.
It's, I'm talking
Then-
more of the formal
Okay.
board. We're recorded, people can take snippets of video.
Kim, what do you want your title to be?
Oh,
We have to use them. We're
Kim.
recording.
Board Recording Secretary Coleman,
Actually,
you
it's-
will have the
it's-
longest title out
It's
of
board
all of us.
secretary.
Board
Oh,
Already
board
done,
secretary.
yeah.
secretary.
BS.
Absolutely,
No.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
No, don't apologize.
A little punchy, Charlie.
I just want to make a comment about section 5, A, B, and C in our board norm document here. And it's about supporting board decisions after the board makes decisions. Having been a member of a large number of boards and having been in the minority on a large number of decisions, I've always struggled with this notion about how to represent myself and represent my place on the board and the institution or organization that board represents and the decisions that board has made. So I'm not terribly dissatisfied with either A, B, and C. Neither am I terribly satisfied with any of them. I think the notion that board members should have an obligation to support the majority of the board, that's true. But I also think board members have the expectation as independent board members that if they have different views about what the board has decided, that should be available to them to make those views.
And just for me personally, I think both are true. There have been, even in my years of service here, votes that I didn't necessarily support. And I have had conversations with folks about that. It's like, no, I didn't vote for it because of X, Y, and Z. However, it passed as a board, and as a board, we will continue to do C, D, and E to see it move forward. So for me, that's how I view that, is that I can still have that sort of individuality, but when I'm doing the work as the board, I'm pushing forward whatever the board's decision has been. I can still have my own view, but I'm not going to undermine the board's work.
So for the Hills decision, as soon as that's voted in favor of, I'm all in about Hills,
Yeah.
all in. Because that's the decision we
Right.
made. There's
Oh,
no
yeah.
I think it's not undermining. This is what we're doing. Once we agree to do it, we're doing it. And that, when this was written, that's not how the board was functioning. We had a board member go to different schools and argue against the board, decisions that were already made. So he was providing information that was contrary to what the board had decided on. So they had to be very sensitive. It was a real problem. But I think that you've described the distinction well, and I think that having been the worst person to make the most offensive vote so far since we've been here, I'm all in on Hills, because we decided we're doing it, you know?
Yeah, I didn't think you were offensive, I think
Thank
you
you.
were.
Thank you very much. I was just looking for that.
Yeah.
I was confused though by the language of 5C a little bit.
I do too.
And I think I understand the intent, but I'm not sure if the language is the best way to get there.
Yeah. We're not gonna use any of this.
But,
Oh, okay.
We're gonna find the policy.
But
that
is-
ASB has.
right, that's what I'm saying,
Okay.
we're gonna.
But is the intent, what you guys just said, the intent of 5C is when you go out in the public, you say, this is the decision that was made, this is why. However, I didn't vote for it. Like, is that, when it
I
says,
mean-
then explain your position?
Well,
Like, what does that mean?
It's just kind of what Rutina just
Okay.
described, I think.
That is.
Okay.
I mean, I do it the reverse.
Well,
that
that's what I was gonna say.
explain
You
my
explained your
decision.
position first,
Yes.
and then you-
then it's like, but this is why we're gonna do it, and these are all the great things about it. But all these sort of little details might not necessarily appear in the policy. I mean, what we're saying is, we like the essence of norms. We now want you all to use this when I say you all, P&G, to craft a policy with this at the heart of it and bring it back to us as a board so we can codify, vote on it, and move forward.
And Jane, if you did some of that research about other policies in the building,
Yeah.
So-
I didn't know you
think
did
just
this.
kind of messaging it more in the positive rather than the negative.
Yeah,
that's what
it
I
does
was
look
gonna
like
say
a
too.
reprimand.
Well, at the time, I think it was.
It was.
Here's the things we want to do rather than the
Yeah.
stuff we
I
don't
think it
want to
was.
do. Right.
Yeah, and at the time, because at the time, this type of language was needed to get the board to sort of function. I think we're beyond that,
Right.
and we can have better language.
And Superintendent Degner, I think that this particular,
That
let's
seemed
see,
awkward.
this,
Yeah,
this,
that was.
this clip that's on the website, also
We'll
has.
pull this down.
Yeah,
And the other thing that's on the website on the same clip is the goals that are all out to.
yeah, they're gonna pull it down, because this is our strategy.
I wanted that to know that.
Yes. Yeah.
So these
Now
won't
they
be a click anymore.
So then, sounds like we're on board committees. And thank you, Kim. She put the descriptions on there. So a little bit of background. What ends up happening at the organization meeting, that's sort of like our restart for the year. So folks would sign up for new board committees. You could stay on the ones you are on right now if you absolutely love them. But everything sort of resets in November. So we might see, JP, you got your finger out?
No, I'm just
Oh, I thought you was like, wait a
thinking
minute.
ahead. In my
So
head,
we
sorry.
go through sort of like potentially new membership on some of those boards.
Okay.
So leading up to the organization meeting, this will be a shared document that people can go in and sign up for the various boards that they would like to see. And I know there was previous conversation that folks would like to see a couple other community committees, community commissions added. And so we can talk about those today, about adding those and seeing how people feel about all of what I just said.
I'd suggest looking at the Coalition for Racial Justice as a committee, and I think I talked about this previously, I think. I think the coalition is not functioning.
That's what I was just gonna say.
Yeah.
I think we should take it off,
Yeah,
right? 'Cause it's
Coalition
not-
of Racial Justice.
But I think the Black Voices Project
Yeah.
and the Jefferson County Interfaith Coalition are also two groups that worthwhile have.
So Black Voices is on here, but the other one
Oh,
you
is that-
mentioned,
Black
yes.
Voices is.
Black
Interfaith
Voices
now.
is on here.
Oh, sorry.
On the committee page, Charlie, you have to click out on that
Oh, okay.
handout.
All right.
But the the
Is the other
Interfaith
one too?
Coalition isn't on here.
There's not a description for Black Voices, and Charlie, I wonder if you maybe want to put a description together
Take
since
the
you are
one
the
out of
treasurer.
Bylaws for
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
And then pass that on to Kim and Interfaith Coalition, Mark, I know.
Latinos for Education.
So can you pass that on to Kim and the description of it,
Sure.
so that can
Yep.
be added?
Yes, good idea.
And I don't, I guess these descriptions, does it talk about, how long, when they meet? how
Yes.
often?
So
Because
if,
that's
with the
a big-
descriptions, we should add when they meet.
Yeah, there's something like the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is like, meets
Quarterly.
maybe
MPO.
quarterly and
They
like,
do,
yeah.
that's, yeah, because
Very pro
sometimes I need
forma.
people to go cover.
So here's what I was going to mention, and Charlie and I briefly discussed this after the last joint entities meeting. I think that it's also something to consider. We don't have to have a liaison at every single meeting of that group. So for example, Latinos for Education, I'll be there all the meetings because I translate for it. But I don't think all of the liaisons, or any liaison, like if Jane wants to continue to go, she's obviously, I'm glad she goes every time, but she can still be a liaison and commit to going once a month, or whatever we decide it to be. Because what I'd like to see, and I'm curious what you think about this, I'd like to see some different groups come up, because I'm not sure how often these groups have been revisited, and that as we add groups to it, we can perhaps back off on the number of meetings you must attend. And that's an agreement you can make with that entity as well, right? Like, I would want to know, BVP, you've got 3 or 4 of us at every meeting. What if we did this, right? Like, what if we instead committed this? Anyone, that's the only one I know about because I've gone to that one, right?
Black Voices.
Oh, BVP, gotcha, okay. I just want to make sure that we're listening to enough different groups with different points of view. I don't know that we are. I mean, for example, we didn't have a Latinos group, right? Just as an example. So, and if we listen to one group more than others, we're not getting a great representation, a great voice. So, for example, I would like to speak with, or someone can speak with Neighborhood Centers of Johnson County. I think it would be great if we had a liaison at those meetings. If NCJC says, hey, cool, but how about you only come to one every other month? Great, whatever, man. Whatever you think works best for you guys. Maybe they also choose what meeting would make most sense for our liaison to attend, meeting or meetings, because they're going to address something that's really linked. Now, maybe they say you're welcome to go to every single one. Awesome. But I think or UAY is another one I thought of, right? These are just.
I mean, I see what you're saying, that we should have a contact person that we can put out to these groups and say, you know, Maka is going to be the contact person for all of our community groups, so contact her when you want to sort of talk about an issue or
Whatever.
an idea or what's going on, when you want to report of what's going on in our school or report from the board. Yes, I like that, with the understanding that, I mean, realistically, we all have lives, we all have other responsibilities, and we just have to make sure that we're not sort of putting more on our plate than what we can do, but at the same time that we're opening ourselves up to hear from more groups.
Yep. And so you can contact those groups. I also had Iowa City Downtown District, for which I'm already a liaison too. That's a good one.
But I mean, it's the Chinese Association.
Awesome.
I mean, it's so what
Yeah.
I think some of the homework is we have to do is perhaps send those lists or names of groups to Kim, do you want me to collect them?
No, I can collect them,
Okay.
that's fine, yeah.
With the
Kim,
description.
Do we already have an email group though of community organizations that we liaise with when we, because maybe what we do is we send them an email and say, we are do you feel that we need to have greater communication between the board and your group? If so, respond, and then we can
And I
talk
would,
through what that.
I would draft that email very
But-
strategically, so it says, listen, we're not trying to join your board.
Right.
We're not committing.
We're not committing to
doing
every meeting.
Nope.
Yeah.
But we want to be a liaison.
Yes.
Feel free to contact us. Sometimes that's a phone call.
To facilitate
Yeah.
communication in a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, and so then I don't know how formal we want to get, because like, for example, both UAY and neighborhood centers are part of juvenile justice. And now that, and that covers a bunch of social service. So just being mindful that are there spots where, because I think the more of those kind of meetings where it's the entire community talking about a common issue, and then they're weighing in, then there's a role for us maybe a little more formally to go to those quarterly meetings. Because again, not to insert ourselves into because number one, that list will only get longer. We're only going to add more groups, right? So I just want to be mindful of spreading, are we spreading ourselves too thin?
And
Are
that's
we going to be
why
effective?
we're saying we're not making a commitment
Yeah.
of every single meeting where they dedicate 45 minutes to. I mean, it's sort of
Right.
like, no.
But if you're a community member,
Regional
and you see-
transportation hub? Is that what you mean?
This is a very limited list.
imagine from the
And as
last
someone who
joint
comes
meeting.
into this from different parts of the community, I look at that list and think, where'd you come up with these? Like, why are these your top 5, 10 that you go to all their meetings? If I'm,
Yeah.
right, I mean, it isn't what you'd automatically think.
But-
Oh, that makes sense.
I'll say that me personally, I get the most out of going to a meeting put on by a group that I am not a member of and sitting and listening.
Yep.
And that is how I learn the most. And and I'm willing to do more of that if I don't want to intrude. I don't want to go without being invited. And so
Right.
it's been hard to say, how do you go to these groups? I'd also add that I would love to go to some PTO meetings at schools because again, that's a chance to get into buildings and hear what's going on at schools that I don't know about. So I don't know if there's a way, again, I'm not going to commit to every single PTO, but I'm happy to make myself available.
But I think
And I'd like them
that's
to
something
know
that's more-
that, so
Yeah.
that if they would like somebody to come, they feel comfortable inviting us.
Just to say, hey, if you want to invite a board, and maybe we come up with a process for whatever group, just to say, hey, we would love somebody from the district or the board, we would love to invite you to a PTO meeting.
Yeah.
And just say, hey, this is a thing you could do. Because maybe some groups,
DPO knows that though. I mean, that's,
we go to that every year.
and everyone's
Yeah.
represented, no, but I mean, we can convey that at every
Oh, you
meeting.
could convey that,
Yeah,
right.
and that's what it's there for.
Right.
So we can do that pretty streamlined. I think, again, I'm just expressing concern that this list, we are,
Make it a
we need to make it broader because it is limited representation. And if you've been part of different groups, you may think that group doesn't represent who they think they represent, or they don't represent everybody. So we need to mix that up a little bit. At least consider how we would mix it up, and then maybe we land on the exact same groups. I don't know. Maybe we would.
I just think that groups should know that I'm happy to go to their meetings.
Which is that email.
Yeah, but absolutely, I feel like that's part of the job.
Mhm.
I'm not going to come with solution, but I'm always happy to listen, and I think we all are. So, and that to me is where the breakdown is, because it's probably that groups don't think that we have time to come and listen, so they don't ask. And we have time, but we don't want to intrude. And
Yeah, especially when there's 7 people, and those people could change with any given
Yeah.
election. And just
Yep.
to say, here's a process to invite a board member or
There's one question I have about the board committees. In our policies, it says we have a financial oversight committee, and I talked to Matt about this, and I don't know, it's sort of been, I think it's been kind of enveloped into the operations committee.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we want to change the language in the policies, or if we actually want to have a financial oversight committee, but I just think one or the other, maybe we should change that we're consistent.
I thought.
Was that the
Financial
insurance?
Oversight Committee was required.
It's part of reviewing
it's the
The
bill.
bills.
The bill.
We probably need to get that rotation out.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
that's the
Okay.
I thought about that after we talked, Jane, and I
Okay.
think that's become the form and function of that is the reviewing the bills process, I think is how
Okay.
we're
Okay.
meeting that obligation, so.
Okay.
And we could be more clear about that in policy too, if that's the way it's designed for us,
Okay.
rather than meeting as a committee that, Kim and I could work on that.
Because I think that the financial review committee was born out of not necessarily issues within this district, but
But others.
misspending in
Yeah.
other districts. And the state recognizing that not all boards were doing that piece that we're required to, is the oversight of financial spending,
Yeah.
so.
I
But-
don't see the joint entities on here, should it be on here?
Probably.
And how come you weren't supposed to sit at the table? I didn't understand.
Well, I think it was just
Only for
elected
elected
officials is what I
Yeah.
realized.
So I probably
Yeah.
shouldn't have been at the table either, right?
No,
Yeah,
you're
you're
elected.
elected.
Oh, okay. You said
Also,
that,
they
I thought,
don't
well,
care.
shoot.
Yeah,
well,
they
No,
I
they
don't
don't
care
care.
either, but I
Okay.
was like,
Uh,
this is a little bit.
I just was
Because
curious.
it's
I'm
something
talking
we
about
do
senior
along.
Yeah.
But back to the bills, because I don't think we've done this in the last 3 years, so Jane and Maka and Molly, you don't know, but we used to have the spreadsheet and you would sign up for a month.
And I
And
want to go
two-
back to
I want to
that.
go back to doing that, and
Let's
two,
get that
and
up.
2 people per month take an in-depth look at the bills. And everyone can always
Okay.
look at the bills.
Right.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or it's not
I like
every
that.
month, it's every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Because
it's
it's every,
every
it's
board
the,
meeting.
it's
I
the
think that's a
bills for
great
the
idea.
year.
So-
I would like that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would too, because
We wanna
then
go
I'll be
back to-
accountable for a certain
And I
amount.
know that someone
Yes.
is really looking at.
And then I know someone else on the months I don't.
I love it.
So, yeah.
That's awesome.
And then we just go into the Excel sheet and sign up.
So you're gonna put this out.
And like
in a-
December's the worst
In a way
month,
that we can
FYI.
sign up.
Yes, it's going to be a shareable document once we've made some additions and cleaned it up a little bit.
Yep.
We will all get an email from Kim saying, be sure to sign up for your interested committees. And the finalized committee sign up then is uploaded on that organization meeting. And that December is when sort of that new turnover happens. So if you're on a committee like the Metropolitan Planning Organization, I would attend, if I'm not going to do it anymore, I would attend their November meeting and say, hey, the new person looks like it's going to be J.P. Clausen. You need to start emailing him and inviting him to those meetings. So you just sort of communicate, if you're with a group now that you're not continuing on, that there might be some turnover, or once we know there's turnover.
So I'm on the DPO thing every day, first of all, because I have a long-term relationship with DPO, but I have to go anyway, because I'm the PTO rep, just so you know that. I'm not trying to monopolize that.
No,
Other
it's
people-
fine.
Okay, I have to go.
You
for
and
November.
Charlie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm more available, now that they're in the evenings, like before I could never go, because it was,
In the middle of the day.
or twice a year they
Yeah.
gave me one.
Right,
And
twice
now
a
they're
year,
all-
yeah.
They changed the
And are they gonna
time.
be Zoom all the time?
They're deciding.
So just to make sure we get things
I
sort
know,
of
for the schools.
processed as quickly as possible for Kim, can we agree to send her information about
Yeah.
new committees, groups? We have to have this done by the 29th?
Yeah, so you got a little bit.
Yeah, so probably by the first meeting in November, and then that gives us still 2 weeks to sign up.
Would you send an email telling us that?
Yep.
What you'd like to hear from us and what you want included in it?
So,
That would be great. And then the other thing I was gonna say is, I need to understand better how many people are supposed to be going to these. DPO, for example, sometimes we have over 4. I don't know, BVP, I get all their minutes, so I see who goes to those. Do we need to worry about how many people are going to those? It goes to balance and it goes to quorum.
yeah, so
I,
I would recommend keeping it under a quorum.
yeah, like I don't think you can,
No.
you should
You
not
should
afford
not,
people anyway.
and no.
Right.
I probably over jumped the number then at DPO.
No, it's-
I bowed out.
So,
Jane and I are always looking at who's there and trying to figure out the number.
and that's
Sorry,
why I
I was
think we
I had
need
no idea.
to be very
I thought,
aware
oh,
of
I'm
who
supposed to
signs
go
up,
there.
who's
I
going.
had another.
Well-
Something else to do.
I did, so
Okay.
it was fine.
So look, so
Yeah.
what are we gonna do about BVP, because you two are
Well, I don't
members?
go, yeah, but
Okay.
I don't go every single month,
Yeah.
and when I typically go, I communicate to folks.
I was planning on joining the
Latinos?
Latino group,
Okay,
so, yeah.
well, and so what I'm wondering, do we still wanna stick with 2 members?
No.
We just wanna go
EVP,
to 1.
We want 1 member.
Okay, well,
And
yeah,
you
okay.
can be present, I just think you can't be.
Well, that's how we've always done it. is we just haven't deliberated in any form or fashion
Well,
at a
you can
BVP.
show up to and sit and listen in the
Yes,
audience,
we did that at that playground meeting
as long as you're
a
not
couple of years ago.
participating.
It gave Chase a heart attack.
Sorry about
It's
that.
too many of us were there.
Were there any other
Being
housekeeping
number
questions
five
about
or
that?
whatever.
I would
it
just say
was.
maybe on
That was
equity
nothing.
committee, and I've talked to.
I'm sorry, what JP
Just
started
on the equity committee, if we just talk, because Charlie and I have been going, and I've been, I talked to Laura and Matt a little bit about my bandwidth. So one, that is, like health insurance committee takes zero real mental or emotional effort. It's very short, it's very informative. The equity committee takes a great deal of mental and emotional effort. It is fully 2 hours talking about the deepest, heaviest things, getting into heavy, deep weeds. And so one, I'm just being really honest about and I've been a very, I've gone to all of those and I'm like at the heart of some of that emotional, but whether it's explaining kind of doing my role of talking about where we're at and how we can get, because it's a lot of times that's a committee who's like, you all are messing up. I mean, it is, right? Because there's things that are wrong, people are mad about it and they want to change. And that's the work we're doing, but it's a thing to be like, okay, we are doing that, and
So you want a rotation of people?
well,
Or-
I'm just putting it out there. One, we could just move Charlie to the board member, and I could be an alternate. Or I also think that I have learned a lot going there. I think it would be helpful for people if they go just to see
Okay,
how that works.
so more like the DPO sign up.
Yeah, I think it's
And that's
worthwhile.
fine.
If folks want to rotate in, it has evolved from a little bit of a messier, not quite sure of its role, to something that's really at the heart of a lot of our work and effective in that way. And that has everything to do with lots of moving parts.
So I think that's a really good thing to point out, and here's something I'm learning as the Latinos group proceeds. You have to be really careful about, you're a liaison.
Yes.
So that's important, and when I read the BVP minutes, I think it concerns me about how much they're education focused, or school district focused in their conversations, which is obviously part of what they care about, that group cares about. But those minutes suggest to me that it's as if they're a subgroup of our own school district, which they are not. And so with the Latinos thing, that's also a risk, okay? And so I think we need to think about rotating is a really good way of addressing that. You're bringing in someone different from the board. It's not gonna be, a relationship starts to get a little close, okay?
And yeah, that,
It does.
and I think we also have to be more sort of protective. I'm sorry, my back is.
No, it's fine. I get it.
Protective and aware of some of these committees that Matt is being called to, because I think that allows for that relationship sometimes to get blurred, that we as a board want that relationship. I think when we're sending our super, that could maybe send the wrong message, and I don't know if Matt wants to chime in, or you don't care, or.
I disapprove of you going to too many meetings for one group.
Well-
I do. I think it's dangerous.
I think part of it, I think there's some unique factors with all of the groups, right? I think that, and I think context and time and situations that have happened in our district are important to consider. And so it's hard to say there's always going to be a certain routine. I think there's things that are going to happen, or I
Sure.
think there's things that have happened
And that's
that
different.
required our participation
Yes.
there.
Sure.
That's different.
Like I emailed Charlie last month, there wasn't a school district item there and I didn't attend, right? I do get concerned about some of these groups, like you guys are talking about, the overall balance with becoming the liaison versus becoming the agenda item, right? I mean, and that's the thing I think
Yes.
we just all have to be careful of when we're showing up to the meetings is we can't just become the talk. I even feel like that happened to joint entities a couple times where it's like there's
Yeah.
nothing else on the agenda,
Two
so then we
meetings ago.
become the focus. Well, that's
No.
5 municipal governments sitting there. It's not
Yeah.
just us, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the generalized concern. I think we want to have a plan and a strategy about how we visit these, but also be flexible enough to know that if stuff is going down or we hit hard times, we have to be visible and present in some of those situations and be ready to respond. So,
And I think we can do that.
yeah, and I
I
think
do
so
too.
too. And so that's how I would answer that. I mean, I think that it's a balance. It's about trying to be accessible, but also understanding that they need to be able to function without us becoming the agenda item for all of those conversations, or that us, need to bring always new information to the table. Of course, we want to support and share and take feedback in all of those scenarios. So I think this conversation's just been good from a general awareness about trying to think about your roles as board members, mine as superintendent when we go to those. But it's all about relationships, right? And when we're at those things, then we build better relationships to support our work.
I just want to point out, excuse me.
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
I'm a member of the Black Voices Project, it's a Johnson Kane Interfaith Coalition, Center for Justice. And in all of those instances where Matt, I, or other board members have attended meetings, their attendance and at least wanting to answer concerns has increased that group's opinion of the Iowa City Community School District hugely. Black Voices Project, it's gone from pretty much, I would say, distrust and dislike for the district.
Hostility.
Yeah, hostility, right, to the district activities and occurrences, to now, to just that group as a whole, especially the Black leadership of that group, views themselves as supportive and an ally is not quite the right term, but at least a friend of the district, and very interested in a positive way about how they view the district and are continuing equity issues.
I think that I've seen that in the 3 years I've been on Black Voices Project, which is why I'm saying I would make myself available to any community group that wants to invite me, because
Right.
I think that's what the 7 of us do. And to be clear, I don't think that's what Matt does, but we are the elected officials, and it's our job to go and listen to constituents and groups, and I share your concerns that if we're not accessible to everyone, we're not doing our jobs. So it is powerful. I have seen it, and that's why I think we should do it with more groups to build those bridges.
I think also there is a risk with that kind of commitment and presence that their expectations are not reasonable. We aren't. It is not our job to go to a meeting enough times to earn their trust. That's not what we are liaisons. You are a member of the group. That's different. But you're also a board member, so you have to be careful, right? But we can't be responsible for that, because just as easily, you might find a group that we could build a relationship and you won't like what they have to say about it, And people feel that way about BVP. I'll tell you what, they're gonna feel that way about my Latinos group. We can't become that voice. It is separate. And just as quickly as the BDP might say something positive, I've certainly seen them say very negative things, and not just 3 years ago. So we do have to be careful. The Latino group will do the same thing. I mean, I'm not trying to make it about BVP. And the Latino one I compare it to, because that's the group I'm part of, right? So I think we have to be careful. An agenda item versus a liaison, I think, is a really good way of saying it. We can't become that for these groups.
I just don't want to get myself into the echo chamber of the admin team. I think it's important for us to
Absolutely.
get out and hear what other community groups have to
Yes.
say. No
Without-
offense to the admin team echo chamber,
It's
but
times when, as we're acting as the liaison, it may be a good idea to bring along an admin team person, because this is what they do for a living, and they could probably present it from a different angle than what we can.
Yeah.
But I really do not mean to shut down this conversation, because it's good. We have 20 minutes.
Just 20 seconds. Our role in these committees, this is something that we can also put into the
Policy.
policies.
I think that's a really good idea.
yeah.
Let's work that out.
And
Yeah,
I know,
let's put
back to the equity committee, were you envisioning I'll just say,
There's always, we go to that every year. 'Cause
Okay.
Charlie goes to everything. That's just,
Right, I think
Yes.
he was talking about a rotation.
No,
well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't know that
if we do, I was just gonna
Right.
say, if we do a rotating thing like DPO, and they're as heavy as you've described them, I would want to go with somebody else so that I could,
Right.
I could talk about it
Digest.
with that, digest it and go through it.
Charlie, is that every one?
Okay.
I've just noticed. since
But when
I
we do
started-
the chart,
Yes,
if we
when
could
you do
have
the
2
chart,
or
we
even
can do
3
that.
columns for people to
Also,
sign
you
up,
don't want
Kim, that
Charlie
would be
to be
great.
the
I'll
default
put that
member
right
at
in
all
there.
of the meetings, because
No.
he's one of 7.
Well, we have that on all of our committees where somebody is the default person.
But I think that's another thing I want us to be aware of, like, as we're talking
Trying
about.
to rotate.
Sure.
We're
Rotating
trying
it
to
because
get to
otherwise we
rotate
become
to
part of it.
people,
Well,
new faces. But, I'm sorry
I'm not gonna
guys,
say no.
we have to move on to the last 3 items, because we are ending at noon. Convention format.
That's
We,
quick.
what?
Yeah,
What?
Yeah.
too hard.
Super excited for the convention.
It's
Yeah, so
awesome, Mark.
the
No, okay.
convention format, we put a link in there and a reminder of the UEN's annual meeting invitation. Pre-conference is on Tuesday with the regular conference starting Wednesday, continuing into Thursday. Kim has got you registered. Where are we staying? Which hotel?
Hilton.
The Hilton.
I've got everybody registered for UEN too, dinner or
Okay,
banquet. So.
and for the UEN dinner and I think it's at the same place. The dinner's at the Hilton.
I
if
believe
remember
so,
right
yep.
when I looked yesterday.
Last year it was.
And how
Yeah.
many
Yeah, it was
show of
kind of
hands
split.
are going? Okay,
All right.
You're going?
yeah.
Okay.
So that's the convention, so I think that'll be a good opportunity. It's always during the dinner, they do a nice kind of state of public education and start talking about legislative priorities and the upcoming legislative session, and so it's always an opportunity to learn a lot. I think also, during the conference aspect of it, of course, that's the major learning opportunity is you're just figuring out sessions of interest for you, and anything that I think kind of speaks to an area you think is important for our district or for your own learning. And then the second item there, Ruthina, is really around learning opportunities. And if you go to the School Board Association website, you see that they really kind of break their website into these different categories around newsroom for latest things, the services they provide out to districts, the toolbox, advocacy center, how they advocate during the legislative session, and then Learning Hub. Of course, they show the annual convention, and then they talk about these custom workshops or podcasts they might point you to. The custom workshops would be if we'd ever want to do anything in our district around a specialized piece of learning. They would come out and help facilitate conversation there. So more just an awareness thing. I don't think there's anything I would suggest right now we should do, but that's really how they've shifted their learning model. They used to kind of offer some different classes, I think, throughout the year or mini conference type formats, things, but now it's really kind of customizable and you have to invite them in to do that. And we've had them here to facilitate different things before in the past, I remember, as I've been on the team.
Yep, we've done that, and I was just going to suggest if other board members thought there was some sort of support around some of those customized workshops. I know they have a list, but other times it's been things that we've saw somebody attended something at the convention and was like, oh my God, that would be really great if we could work on that as a district.
Yep.
They are willing to do one of those as well, so just keep that in mind for some of those sessions you sign up for. Or if there's some thoughts on areas that you think we need to improve upon.
Another learning piece they provide that's instrumental for our team that you guys don't see as much around is the superintendent and finance leaders annual conference and the different tracks they do there. Les is an active participant. Craig Hansel still teaches some of the tracks for that, and so they really are a key resource in some of that finance education that goes on for local districts too. So that is coming up soon. We have a Tuesday night meeting, and then we roll right into the conference, because remember, we shifted with Maka was asking about this the other day.
Yeah.
I forgot to even tell her our meeting's on the 15th, and then the conference starts the 16th. So, yeah.
That's gonna be a busy week. You're looking like, wait, why?
Sometimes I don't follow things.
Oh,
Yeah.
Even though you just referenced me, I still don't know exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
Oh,
You were
it's
asking me about what the pre-conference was, and I didn't even think to say, well, you probably aren't going to go to the pre-conference because we have a school board meeting on Tuesday night. The night of the pre-conference.
Oh.
The same
See,
time.
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. We were both,
See, we already had you guys registered for that stuff.
yeah.
thank you. You know what that
Yeah.
means? I'm gonna drive in early the next morning. If you have a meeting Tuesday night. You have to speak slower sometimes for me to
There you go.
catch it.
So, yeah,
Or just say it
because
again.
some of us didn't catch that. It just
I love that Kim didn't
registered.
either, though, then I feel a lot better.
Yeah.
And then the other piece that's on here.
So I need to cancel all those.
Is setting a date for the next board retreat, because I think it's important for us to have some of these informal meetings, to work on our strategic plan
Yep.
or other big, weighty, meaty things
Yep.
that we can work together, dedicate a 3-hour block of time, and really get a lot of things done. So I'm open to suggestions, but I was gonna suggest, not to be too heavy, but quarterly. So have another one.
I can attend
Have
the
another one
pre-conference
in
because the
like 3
pre-conference is on
months.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
And the
If that
conference is on
sounds
Thursday.
doable.
I have found this meeting to be
I think the
wonderful.
pre-conference.
Yeah, that's, you know, it's in the morning
Mm-hmm,
and we're not like
True.
Because the convention's always Wednesday,
after
Thursday.
a day.
Right.
right,
And
after
Yeah.
a day of work.
Yeah.
or- Now, if, we will probably continue to look at, Saturdays, if that's okay for folks. And stay with
It's the
morning.
16th,
I won't
17th.
move it to 8, no, I'm just playing.
What's it?
Because I'm up by 5. It's like, get here.
Yeah,
The
well,
No.
If we're gonna do 8, somebody has to
Sometimes
bring
they have,
coffee.
like,
No, I'm just joking.
After the convention, they have like a president's,
9 to noon
Board
is
president thing.
good.
I liked it.
Are we gonna have a food
so.
committee?
A food committee.
Oh my god, I would love to be in charge of the food committee.
Lisa,
I
in
will
charge
bring
of the
all
food
of
committee.
my PTO, food, organizing skills. There will be a sign-up genius.
There we go. That sounds
Regulate
good.
policies.
So is there anything else, or
So,
people want to circle back?
so we were wrong and we.
Convention,
continued
you're
further.
okay.
Yeah.
So
What?
what's happening? What are we?
Wednesday is the pre-conference
Yeah.
events,
Wednesday's
and
the
then
pre-conference.
Thursday is a convention. So
We're
you could
fine
either go
on
Tuesday after the board meeting, you could drive to Des Moines.
That's
or-
what I'm saying, though. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna drive
Yeah.
after the board meeting.
But the-
I'll just drive
But they're
early.
saying they got the date wrong, so the pre-conference.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pre-conference,
You're
none of
good.
the stuff actually starts until the 16th.
Right.
day
But
after
the
our board meeting.
UEN dinner is Wednesday night.
Is Wednesday.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the- and the thing
Yeah, and we'll
I'm
stay
doing-
Wednesday night.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That's
we
Wednesday,
still have to
yes.
go up
It's not
Wednesday.
Tuesday, it's
It
Wednesday.
happens the 16th and 17th.
So going,
Yes.
but it
Yes.
starts not crazy early in the morning.
No.
I don't know what time the delegate assembly
The
starts,
delegate
like maybe
assembly-
9,
Yeah,
8 or
delegate
9.
assembly
I think
is at 9.
Oh.
I will just
7:30.
drive in the morning.
So I need to
Yeah.
cancel your hotel reservation
Yes,
for
For
Tuesday
Tuesday
night.
night.
Just
And,
you?
Yes, please.
Okay,
Because I'd rather wake up early than drive late.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Drive late is not a good idea.
Listen to
Oh,
my
you
murder
have
podcast.
a hotel.
Yeah, 'cause
Oh,
she's the
got it.
delegate.
Now
Yeah.
that I
Oh.
drive.
Oh, yeah, the 18th says board president's workshop.
Matt, is there
Yeah.
anything else?
No, I missed, well, Kim and I were trying to
I did
figure that
too,
out,
sorry.
though we missed what you were talking about with the next
Oh,
retreat
we're
date.
going,
Quarterly.
yeah, quarterly, so, 3 months.
Okay.
Comfort captain.
So we
by the way,
will,
Jane.
probably work to
That's
get
what
that
you,
date
comfort
out
captains.
there.
That's what you call it.
We would stick with Saturday, about 9.
So sometime in January. That would be 3 months.
Yes, yeah, it would be.
I'll just say again how much I mean, this is never, it's not easy to work with a group of people, especially when you talk about contentious things and contentious things happen, but this is great. So
I
thanks,
thought it was
everybody.
good.
Yes.
If there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.